we'll go straight to him. Kia ora, Corin. I'm sorry, I read it as Colin, but I've got that entirely wrong. So good to see you here. We've got your written submission in front of us, and we've got you for 10 minutes. So if it's okay with you, I'll just hand straight over to you to make the best of that time. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou e te komiti. Ko aku whakaro nui e tēnei wā e rere atu ana ki ngā iwi, ki ngā hapu, ki ngā kapa, ki te matatini, kua rāme mene atu ki Taranaki. Ara ki puke kura. Rātau e aroha nuiti ana e te iwi o ngā iwi o Taranaki. E manakitia ana e te maungati tōhea e Taranaki. Kua roa e karangahi ana he tūpuna. Anō no nā tata nei, kua whakaturehia hei tangata. Nā i mua i taku haere tonu, he tangata e whakapākeha ana i nei kōrero?
Duncan, you're on mute, my friend.
Good, thanks, Corin. We're just having a little bit of difficulty. It might be just me with the translator. But we can always get it transcribed as well, which we've done before. So if you want to just proceed, that's absolutely fine.
Haere tonu nei, tēnā koutou. Ana, kia hoki atu aku whakaro ki te matatini, te taumā heke heke o te ao Māori. E whakanui ana i te reo Māori, i ngā tikanga Māori, i ngā mātauranga Māori, i te ahurea Māori. Nā, ka pai tēnei, hei tauira ki a koutou mō tēnei mea te kotahitanga. Hei tauira mō tēnei mea te nohotahi i runga i te whakaro o tahi. Ko tāku e mohio nei, ka wanatanga atu, ka wanatanga mai, he Māori ahau ao te pō te ao. Nā, he uri ahau no Ngati Whare, no Waikato, no Maniapoto, no Raukawa, he mokopuna no te kohanga reo, he raukura no te kura kaupapa Māori, i ka awhiro no te panekiretanga o te reo Māori. He roia tūtahi ahau, ai piki ki te paeroia i te tau 2008. No reira, kua te kaumawhitu tau au, e mahi ana i enei mahi. Ko Corin Merrick taku ingoa, kei te whakahe au i tēnei pire. Kei te mohi o kē koutou i ngā kōrero i te whakatau a te rōpū whakamana i te tiriti o Waitangi. E takahia rawatia ana te pire nei i te tiriti o Waitangi. Nā kua kite koutou kua rongo hoki ai ngā tāpaitanga, a ngā pūke ngā ture, te hungaroia Māori, te kāhui ture, ngā roia pau matua e 5 kau. Ngā mātanga reo, kohanga reo, kura kaupapa Māori, ngā hapu, ngā iwi, ngā marae, huri noa i te motu, ngā mātauranga, ngā pirimia ōmua, ngā minita ōmua. Te katoa e ki ana, e he ana tēnei pire. Whakakorehia te pire mātāpono te tiriti o Waitangi. He pai tēnā kupu, ne, te kupu mātāpono. Tēnei mea te pono, kaore he paku pono o tēnei pire. Kaore he pono kotahi e kite ana. Ko te tūāpapa o tēnei pire, he kuare. Kaua i te kuare pēnei te tamaiti nei, he harakore tēnā. Ka aroha nuitia tēnā. Kaua ko tēnā. Ko tēnei momo kuare, e pai ana ki aia, te noho kuare. hei aha mana ngā rauemi kei te kapu tonu o tāna ringa. Ngā kōrero, ngā rangahau, ngā tatauranga, ngā pūtea, katoa ērā kei tāna ringa, engari te aro iaia. He pai ake tāna noho ki te pō. Tēnā i te piki mai, i te kuhu mai, kia tātou e noho nei i te ao marama. Nā, ko ngā pātū o tākou taunā pire, he tāmi. Ua roa a tāmi e mahi ana i tāna mahi. Kaua i konei Aotearoa ana ke kao, engari huri noa i te ao. He tuakana teina a tāmi rāua ko kaikiri. He matua no kōhuru, no pāwhera, no tāhae, no takahi. E kite ana ngā hua o a tāmi mahi e ngā tatauranga tonu i konei, ngā tatauranga te aki tamariki, ngā tatauranga whare here, ngā tatauranga hauora, ngā tatauranga mātauranga. Wa tutuki pai aia ana mahi. Anā ko koutou e te krauna, a rero rua. Whakataru nā ana ki te ao, he ramaroa a New Tireni, mō tēnei mea, mō ngā take iwi take. E tuki ana, tēnei pire ki tēnā whakatairanga. Nā kia huri ake tātou ki te tuanui o tēnei pire. Ki te tuanui o tēnei whare e pīoi mai rā. He whakaetanga tō rangapū. No ngā kaupapa here, a tētahi pāti o tahi, i riro i a rātou te kaumātahi pai heneti o ngā pōti. Ka aroha tātou katoa. Ka aroha tātou te Māori, ka aroha ngā Pākehā, ka aroha te tauiwi e noho mai ana i enei whenua taurikura. Mena e pēnei rawa te hanga o a tātou ture. He nui ngā mahi, hei mua i a mātou, o tira i a tātou. He tiaki, he manaki i te whenua, i ngā moana, i ngā awa, i te taiao. He tiaki i a tātou tamariki, i a tātou mokopuna. He whakaora i tō tātou reo ka meha. He whakaora i a tātou tikanga, i a tātou mātauranga, whakahirahira. Tukuna mātou. Tukuna mātou kia whakapaua a mātou kaha. A mātou kaha ka whakapaua nei hei oranga mō wai mō tātou, mō mātou pānau, mō mātou hapu, mō mātou iwi. Ana, ki a koutou, whakamahia ngā toki kei o koutou ringa. Hei aha, hei turaki i tēnei pire. Kau e noho ai hoki reira. Turaki na ngā pātū a te tāmi e hoa mā. Koe nā tāku ki a koutou, me he pātai tēnā karawhiua mai.
Kia ora, Corin, thanks for that. Just to reassure you, translation was a little delayed, but we did get translation, so it's all good there. Members, we've got just under a minute if anyone wanted to ask a question. No, look, thank you for that. Look, thank you, Corin. We've got your written submission, which I've had a read of, but thanks for taking the time to make that submission. Kia ora.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou.
Thank you. Members, the next submitter is Nai Kaiwhakapumau Itureo, and I think we've got Piripi Walker. Kia ora, Piripi.
Tēnā rā koe. Tēnā koutou.
We've got you for 10 minutes, and I'm just going to hand straight over to you so that we can make the best of the time, and we may have questions at the end if we have some time. Kia ora.
Kia ora rā. Ngā me mo te komiti tēnā koutou katoa, me o tātou aitua. Te korora wi tāmi hana tara Piripi te waharua kia kua Paraundi, kawan. Kua tītaha te rā, kua tū ātō. Kei whiti atu te rā ki tua o tā wauwau. He whakatūpato tēnei. Kei ngaro te iwi, kei pēnei me maru iwi i tore mi ai ki te reinga. He whakatau ki anō tēnei. Kei tawhiti noa tu te Whatuariki, kua kite anoa tia mai. He te iwi Māori, kia matāre i roti tēnei tau. E hara tēnei pere i te mutunga o te whai a te iwi nei, kia whakakoreata mana me ngā tika o te iwi Māori. Ka haere tonu. Kia riro rā no ngā pōti maha o te iwi, te maha e tika ana hei whakakāhore, hei whakangaro rawa i te tiriti o Waitangi. Nō rea kia kaha. Kia uki te kupu a tō tātou tangata, tumuaki, a huirangi Waikirepuru. Kia ngana ki te hau. Pūpūtia te kākaho e kore rau e whati. Puritia te tiriti o Waitangi me o nā huatanga katoa. Me ake kātai ki te rua rautau o te tiriti. Nō reira te taitoke rau kei te mehi. Kei reira te mana mo tēnei motu. Kei te tiriti. My name is Piripi Walker. Ai whakapapa tu Ngati Raukau. Ki te tonga. And to my ancestors of Scotland, Ireland and England. I speak to you as chair and with the support of Ngā Kaiwhakapumau I Te Reo, known in earlier years as the Wellington Māori Language Board. We greet you, the committee, and all submitters, those who are appearing in person and those who just wrote. We greet all of our fellow New Zealanders, no matter where you find yourself standing on this matter of the treaty. And we greet all who are watching today. We salute Taranaki and all of those gathered at the Matatini. Tēnā rā koutou katoa. Our organisation is an incorporated society of 43 years standing, based in Wellington. We have 34 members. We're local. We still meet. We still do our mahi, promoting Te Reo Māori and its official status in Aotearoa. We've been the claimants between 1984 and the present on the Māori language claim, the broadcasting cases, including the FM claims to establish iwi radio, the Spectrum cases, the Māori television case, which went to London to the Privy Council. We founded and continued to govern the Māori language radio station Te Upokoteka in Wellington. It's celebrating 37 years on air, using both languages as everyday languages. In its findings on our Māori language claim in 1986, the Waitangi Tribunal wanted a mutually agreed understanding between the Indigenous people and those who came later on their place in the life of the nation. Recognition of Māori as the Indigenous people and their language as a full, equal, official language were part of that. The Tribunal warned in particular about leaving anger unmediated. Their judgment was written nearly 40 years ago and still resonates in 2024. Their fear was the breakdown of social cohesion. The consensus and careful work obtaining an agreed constitutional framework, which the nation shared until November 2023, produced a sense of a respectful national identity and culture, which in review was a precious thing. Te Reo Māori and Māori identity were cherished by all New Zealanders. We were finally getting there. All New Zealanders, including those born overseas who have settled here, belong here. All felt until then that they were important, all were cherished, all were united with Māori under our flag and our identity. We ask the Select Committee recommend that the bill is not proceeded with and abandoned. Rangatahi Māori were shocked in late 2023 to find themselves living under a government coming hard against all things Māori. In the words of Hana Rāwhiti Maipi Clark, turning her world upside down. We forgot how politics have always looked and sounded in New Zealand. Anti-Māori sentiment has provided a rich vein of votes. Our organisation adopted a strategy for 2024. Rebut, coherently, resist, peacefully, and encourage rangatahi and Māori speakers. Our members signed and supported the letter by the licensed Māori language translators to the Prime Minister, which showed the lies under this bill. We joined the hikoi against it. We have also been corresponding personally with most National Party MPs over the last 8 months on how to support the real treaty now and into the next 2 elections. Languages feature prominently in the constitutional arrangements of all countries. A country is a fence around a group of languages. Secession from older entities and the formation of new countries based on language groupings is the major mover in the establishment of all countries. It is unwise to step suddenly on a new path favoured by only one section of the population on constitutional change. If we are to make changes to our constitutional arrangements, these should be done over generations and be well socialised. Despite our efforts and those of other rōpū, the battle for the official status of te reo in New Zealand has been lost over the last 14 months. Official use has been stopped in its tracks. Publishing for public purposes has ceased. Te reo Māori has faced a withering attack, producing a loss of confidence, which will take many years to restore. We have got ourselves to a dangerous point very quickly. We are only a couple of parliamentary votes away from initiating a referendum which would annihilate the treaty, should the non-Māori majority want that. We have no doubt that this would be permanent, and Māori will never regain the rights it guaranteed. Like the loss of the land itself and the imposition of an English-speaking colonial identity more friendly to outsiders, self-interest will never allow a return to the former constitutional arrangements where the Indigenous minority had enforceable, but sometimes inconvenient rights. This is the case for 4 of our near neighbours, New Caledonia, Tahiti and French Polynesia, Australia, and Hawaii in the outer fringes of Polynesia. 3 of those cases are very recent in terms of major new turns in the constitutional story. The task for well wishes for the friendship between Māori and non-Māori and the agreement of the treaty is to move our voting preferences at the next 2 elections in New Zealand. In 2040, we have the 200th anniversary of the treaty, now only 15 years away. We must ensure we listen to Māori and preserve the treaty in a legal way, a way that Māori support. When it comes, that day in 2040 can be a day of joy and hope and togetherness, not a day of bitter regret and unhappiness for our nation. The task for younger members of Parliament within the current coalition of parties is to move to ensure a new kind of thinking within your political parties starting now. You must consider your role in upholding the sacred agreement between the Crown and Māori, the Treaty of Waitangi. Do not join or empower those who are doing it down. Do the right thing by Tiwi Māori. You will feel better in the end. Between 1972 and 2022 in the half-century, we were heading towards the right place and felt how things could be if our nation was to truly flower. 50 years of listening to Māori and gently creating a new world, revitalising Māori language and identity, beyond land loss, confiscations and assimilation, and denial of all treaty rights that went before. For the last 40 years, encouraged by the vision of our leaders from both major parties, by the wise judgments of the Waitangi Tribunal, and response of our media and our nation, our rōpū has been fond of saying, We have a great little country here. We still have, but now the jury is out. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Piripi. Thank you for your submission and thank you for your written submission and also for all the work that you do to preserve today. We haven't actually got enough time for any questions there, so we're going to have to leave it there. But thank you again for your submission.
Kia
Kia ora. And members, the next submitter is the Local Government Committee of the Public Service Association, and we've got Lee Manaia and Stephanie Macdonald, I think. Kia ora, Lee, I can see you there, and I can now see Stephanie as well.
Awesome.
We've got 10 minutes with you today, and so I'm going to hand straight over to you to make your oral submission and answer any questions at the end. Kia ora.
Thank you. So good afternoon, Chair and members of the Justice Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to our submission in opposition to the Treaty Principles Bill. My name is Lee Manaia and Stephanie Macdonald is with me today. We are here on behalf of 12,000 members working in the local government sector within the PSA Association. Public Service Association. For those of you that may be unfamiliar with the organisation, the New Zealand Public Service Association is New Zealand's largest trade union, an organisation that advocates for a better working life for its 96,000 members. Our submission is part of a series by people working in public and community services across the Public Service Association. We have been elected to represent these members who work in city, district, regional, and unitary councils and authorities from across the country. We will speak in particular to the potential outcomes that this bill could have on our members working in local government and recommend an alternative approach. We recognise there was an unprecedented demand for opportunities to speak to submissions, so we'll only highlight key points from our written submission. We will also welcome any questions that you may have. We make the following points. I'll hand over to Steph now.
Kia ora, Lee. Tēnā koutou ngā rangatira, e hui mai nei. We oppose this bill because it does not honour or enhance a true partnership between local government and Māori. People working in local government implement te tiriti in the course of their work every day. Undermining the te tiriti partnership will make it harder for these people to do their job. It will shut down the important conversations that we need to have with our communities to deliver everyday public services such as water, housing, transport, pollution prevention. This bill allows one party to unilaterally define the terms of the treaty, which is unacceptable given the treaty's significance as a founding document. Our membership sees the bill as part of a wider pattern of recent legislation undermining Māori voices in decision-making, such as the Local Government Act amendment regarding Māori wards to deprioritising te tiriti. These barriers to participation will only widen the gap highlighted in the 2023 Review into the Future for Local Government report, He Piki Tūranga, He Piki Kōtuku. That panel undertook extensive engagement around the motu and found that legislative frameworks alone are not sufficient to build and maintain relationships between local government and Māori. We would support strengthening these frameworks rather than the backward steps proposed in the bill. This bill impedes existing co-governance arrangements. It hinders goodwill and collaboration. In local government, our members have experienced co-governance where Māori are fully engaged in decision-making processes alongside local authorities. This bill makes it difficult for those with established co-governance arrangements that are working to continue that work in good faith. In summary, it's about capability and capacity for both those working in local government and for many hapu, iwi and Māori organisations. For local authorities, this bill undermines attempts to grow the cultural capabilities staff need to genuinely and meaningfully engage with tangata whenua in partnership processes. Many hapu, iwi and Māori organisations are under-resourced, particularly those who have yet to complete their settlement processes. Yet they face an incredible demand for their time and expertise. This bill will undermine their ability to access funding and make it more difficult for them to participate in government decision-making processes. Lee?
So in conclusion, there is little in the bill about how local authorities will be held accountable for upholding treaty principles. Māori deserve to be reassured there will be real consequences for local authorities that fail to uphold te tiriti and their obligations to Māori communities. Our members working in local government would like to see the same. We believe enhancing the status quo and confirming the commitment of a true partnership that honours Te Riti o Waitangi is a better course of action. We welcome any questions that you may have and thank you again for the opportunity to speak on behalf of our membership.
Kia ora, thank you for that, Stephanie and Lee. Members, we do have some time for questions, if there's questions there. Scott Willis.
Thank you both. I'm assuming there's probably a really simple answer to this, but how does upholding te tiriti help the protection of nature or te taio and help build social cohesion? Because we've heard from a number of people how damaging this is, and I'd like you to open up that a little bit more if you could.
Thank you, Scott, for your question. If I can answer in terms of nature, I'm aware of local government has responsibilities for caring for a number of sites and places, natural resources, and if we don't know where wāhi tapu sites are, sacred sites are, there's no chance of protecting them from pollution prevention, from oil spills. If we don't know that there's an urupā burial site, how can we support the site from being protected from coastal erosion or for flooding inundation? Those are just some examples from nature. From a social cohesion point of view, I think it's about bringing as wide a range of views to the table to understand the decisions that are being made by council and the implications for the community. The Future for Local Government report says that we typically hear from older landowners rather than a more diverse representative group of people in a decision-making process. That engagement with Māori was working really well with some councils and not in others. It varied widely and at times it was tokenistic. So if we're not making decisions based on the full picture, on the full range of views, it's really hard for the elected members in a council, like the elected members sitting in Parliament, to make their best decisions. Lee, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, happy to. No, I don't think I'll add anything further. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Look, that was a really good submission and a good answer. And thank you also for your written submission, which we've got in front of us as well. Again, a comprehensive document. So thanks for the work that you've done there and for the work that you do. So kia ora, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Members, our next submitter is Anthony Blomfield. I'm not sure whether he's on or not yet. So we'll just pause for a moment and wait to see if he's gone online. Can you just move on to this call? Members, we're a little ahead of schedule, so I'm going to use my position and say we'll have a quick, 4-minute stretch break. So if we just want to switch our cameras off, give the clerk some time to organise our next submitter.
Okay, hang on a second. Okay. Okay, can anybody hear me? I can't hear anything. Darn.
Your submission.
That's okay. I have something important to say off the clock just before we start. It's a problem.
Okay. Just saying that if it's better, we could pitch you in quite possibly on another occasion if that would be better for you, Tony.
No, I'm feeling okay at the moment. I'm on some pretty heavyweight painkillers and that's sort of keeping me going.
Okay. All right then.
Just let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, we'll just wait for one of our other MPs. We've got a couple of other MPs and we'll get another one. We'll wait for them. I did tell them to come back online, and we've got Mr. Bates here. So we've got you for 5 minutes, Tony. And what we'll do is we'll just hand straight over to you. And if there's any time left, we may have questions at the end. So over to you, Tony. Kia ora.
Okay then. I'd like to start by talking a little about my whakapapa. I'm what I call a Generation N New Zealander of Maori descent. My grandmother, Catherine Downs, was the daughter of a notable Ngāpuhi lady who was a direct descendant of Honihika. My granddad was a notable Maori translator and lawyer, practiced Maori land law and was appointed to stipendiary magistrate of Maori affairs. He acted as an advocate for Maori people in Northland for his services to the Maori people. He was gifted a toku by all of the Northern chiefs and dignitaries when he left the area. The toku was carved from the balustrade of the Bigotine Boyd following the 1809 massacre of the crew, and it was gifted to Honihika. So there's a bit of history there. My father, who was also a lawyer, and acted as an advocate for Maori, spoke Maori and sang Maori. The stick was handed down to him. It was then handed down to my brother, where it is now. We treasure this gift greatly. So just to give me a little bit of credibility, if you like. So this makes me 1/8 Ngāpuhi. I believe I'm speaking on the behalf of my family and around about 1,000 friends, and I suspect there are a lot of other people who will empathise with what I say. Look, I've read a fair few of the submissions, and to me it's clear there's a total misunderstanding of both the treaty and the bill. We see that there's a higher level of complexity and that the subject is understood from all perspectives by a large percentage of New Zealanders. It seems that the intrinsic simplicity of the treaty has been smothered in a swamp of legal obfuscation and ambiguity to the point where most of us just don't know what's going on. Whilst many Maori people have now been trained to be activists, if you like, many of the non-Maori population feel intimidated, fearful, confused and angered by the exploitation of the treaty through the legal industry. This Maorification campaign has resulted in a class division of all people into either Maori or others, and I think you'd have to agree that that division has occurred. The billion-dollar treaty industry is a gravy train for the legal profession, the universities and the media, and little or no consideration has been given to the ordinary New Zealanders. So I'm just trying to present on behalf of the ordinary New Zealanders, as I call them. The universities and the media, little as no consideration has been given to ordinary New Zealanders. Iwis themselves lay claim that they have about $90 billion in wealth, and they intend to bring the government of our nation down with this money. Where did all this money come from? Actually, it came from the taxpayer. That's where it originated. And just imagine if all that money had gone into healthcare, education, and infrastructure instead of having an internal fight on our hands. I believe that the reality is that Maori have for a very long time actually held many advantage over the others. There are special Maori grants for study, travel, business, development, building, land, research, and much more. Iwi people get a large grant of about $500,000 when they apply for a foreshore and seabeds hearing, and yet the opponents get nothing. And last year we had the Waitangi Tribunal tell the government they wanted them to consider giving all land from North Cape to Devonport back to Ngāpuhi. You know, we see hospital managers are now mandating that clinical staff practice Maori regardless of the acuity level. So I think Maori have many exclusive rights that the other people don't enjoy. And this is making a lot of the New Zealanders nervous, fearful. I know for myself that I'm a bit worried about the land thing because I have something called an SNA on my property. If the DOC proposal goes through that all of their assets be handed over to Maori, does that include my SNA? So there's a lot of fear and misunderstanding out here, you know. And I sort of asked myself, am I living in a Western democracy or something else? Is it any wonder so many people are disenchanted and leaving the country? Ordinary New Zealanders, good people, are scared and confused and leaving the country, and this is part of the reason. As the activists get louder and more contemptuous, the whole divisive agenda is rapidly unraveling our society, destroying our credibility, our economy, and the morale of our people. So I think, and I'm just going to speak off the cuff here, that what's really important to me is the people of New Zealand unify as one nation under one flag and one common understanding that's common for all. I know that historically the treaty is there, and I believe I have my understanding of that, but I think it is imperative that New Zealanders unite as one, and we know that this was the wish of my ancestors anyway. I don't know about yours, but certainly was mine. Obviously, there's been a lot of wrong done by both sides of the argument over the decades.
Tony, I'm just going to interrupt and let you know you're actually out of time, so I'm just going to ask you to conclude in a couple of sentences, if you will.
Okay, so I ask that the committee take this bill forward to the next steps for a much broader national discussion and to involve the public of New Zealand as much as possible. I think this is a really big deal for the country and we need to follow it through.
Cool. Thanks very much. Obviously, we're out of time for questions as well. So thanks for your submission, Tony. Hope you get well soon. And we've got your written submission with us as well. So thanks for that. Kia ora.
Did you want me to send this thing in to you or not?
You're welcome to send that in and it will become part of the record if you would like to do that.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Members, we've now got William Ludbrook, who we have for 5 minutes. I've just been informed that we're having some difficulties there. So we've got the next submitter, the PSA Eco Network, and we've got a number of people there. So I think we're going to go to them, and I see Briar. Got Briar there. Kia ora, Briar. Good to see you.
Yeah.
And have you got other people coming on?
Yeah, there's Paige.
Okay, great.
Just the
All
two
right.
of us.
We've got you for 10 minutes. So what I propose to do is to hand over to you now, and if we've got some time, there may be some questions at the end. So kia ora.
Cool, thank you. Ke te rangatira tēnā koutou, ko Briar Wyatt, ko Paige Connell-Culver tēnei. Ka mahi mātou e te whatunga iko e te pukinga here tikanga mahi. Hello, Ministers and MPs of the Select Committee. I'm Briar Wyatt and I've got Paige Connell-Culver here with me. We are two of the conveners of the PSA Eco Network. The Eco Network represents over 3,000 public servants from across the public sector, including the public service, state sector, local government, health sector, and publicly funded community services. Our members care about the planet. In many cases, our members are motivated by the same knowledge and expertise that also enables them to deliver the high quality public services that Aotearoa deserves. We'll take our written submission as read and want to tautoko as well the many submissions heard by this committee from iwi and hapu, constitutional experts such as Max Harris and environmental organisations who are telling this government that this bill must not proceed, not so much supporting the previous speaker. There is a key word in our union's name, pukinga. Our former kaumatua, Ki Whare Mihaka, describes this as referring to the collective skills of all of our people. This bill significantly undermines the very first collective agreement of this country, Te Tiriti o Waitangi. This may not have been a collective employment agreement, as we know of collectives now, but our foundational text marked the coming together of a staunch partnership between the settling nation of Britain, tangata whenua, and all of those who would be enabled in future to live in Aotearoa through Te Tiriti, like myself. We are here as public servants on our lunch breaks to talk to why we believe it is fundamentally vital that this bill does not progress to a second reading. We ask all MPs of this Justice Subcommittee to recommend ceasing analysis and development of this bill now. Public servants are here to serve Aotearoa. As Public Service Minister Judith Collins recently said, serving the public must always be our top priority, regardless of how tough the operating environment is. We should never lose sight of this simple objective. She asked public service chief executives to ensure that we tell ministers when intervention is necessary and tell ministers when to stop or change a policy. To this committee, we are taking Minister Collins' advice. You must stop this policy. It is not just on the basis of Collins' commitment to free and frank advice by which we are making this submission. As legislated in the Public Services Act 2020, the fundamental characteristic of the public service is acting with a spirit of service to the community. We must uphold political neutrality and actively promote the stewardship of the public services. It is in line with these legislative requirements that we say this bill puts all public servants in a compromised position, potentially forced to regress decades of progress built under successive national and Labour governments by asking us to act in a way that conflicts with the Crown's responsibilities as a treaty partner. As the PSA Eco Network, we also know that honouring Te Tiriti is essential to guiding an equitable response to the environmental and climate crises. Māori communities have long been at the forefront of addressing climate impacts and environmental degradation. Centering Te Tiriti and listening to tangata whenua are absolutely vital if we are to achieve a just transition in Aotearoa, one that accepts the generosity of Mātauranga Māori and works in partnership with the Indigenous people of this nation for the benefit of us all. I'm going to hand over to Paige to cover some more specifics.
Kia ora. Māori communities have a different style of planning and resource management to the Western approach used by the government. And each planning style brings different but really complementary strengths and weaknesses. As New Zealand faces increasingly complex challenges, the existing treaty principles developed through the Waitangi Tribunal provide an opportunity and pathway forward for Western and Māori planning approaches to exist in a genuine partnership and deliver long-term sustainable outcomes for everyone. This bill not only ignores the legitimacy of Māori planning, it amounts to forced assimilation to Western practices and damages the progress that's already been made in finding ways to balance two equally important planning systems. This bill effectively diminishes the role and scope of Māori kaitiakitanga and legal involvement in the environmental policy and climate response. As public servants, we know and have seen evidence repeatedly the care, knowledge, support and wisdom that mana whenua bring to defending and uplifting Te Taio. This bill moves in the precise wrong direction for our planet at a time where environmental polycrisis such as climate change and the biodiversity crisis are all encompassing. I'm going to pass back to Briar now.
The Paige, we are already seeing our country flood more regularly, people losing their homes and livelihoods. We don't want to see farmers without fields, harvesters without crops, and people without somewhere to live. For the sake of Aotearoa, we ask that this bill is not supported further through the legislative process so we can stop being distracted from the urgent work required to help communities reduce emissions and build climate resilience for the long-term health and hauora of all of Aotearoa. Manaaki whenua, manaaki tangata, haere whakamua. If we take care of the land and take care of the people, we will take care of the future. Toitu te tiriti, we are happy to take questions.
Kia ora, thank you for that. And thank you for leaving a bit of time for questions. So, members, we've got some time for questions. I see Scott Willis has one.
Thank you, Briar. Thank you, Paige. And you've said in your submission that honouring Te Tiriti is central to an effective and high integrity public, state, local and community services, and talked about the climate crisis with floods, fires, droughts, risk to our primary sector. We've heard also how upholding Te Tiriti helps the protection of nature, or te tau, and building social cohesion. So I'm just wanting to open up, and if you've got any more examples or any more thoughts about how this is so important for us.
Yeah, kia ora. I think everyone on this subcommittee would be aware that obviously Māori are tangata whenua of this land. They were the first people here, and they know exactly what our ecosystems need to flourish and thrive. This has been proved by generations and generations of Māori land that have shown the gold standard of conservation. Hoko mai whenua, land back. That is the key thing that we can do as a government, as a country, to ensure that conservation and our planet survives and that we have something to pass on to future generations.
Thank you for that. Look, if there's no further questions, we'll leave it there, but we have got your really good written submission in front of us. I just want to thank you for taking the time to do that and also to present orally. It's been really useful, so kia ora. We are trying to get William Ludbrook on. So just give that a moment. Yeah, we have had some technical difficulties here. I see we've got Bill there now. So if Bill can hear me, you're currently on mute and you haven't got your camera on. But so if we can address that, we can even just the camera, the audio, that'd be good. So if you could unmute yourself, Bill, we can get underway. Kia ora, Bill. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Great. Well, Bill, we've got you for 5 minutes to talk to your submission on the Treaty Principles Bill. So in the interest of time, why don't I just hand it straight over to you? Kia ora.
Okay, thank you to the committee. Thank you for your invitation and for the opportunity for me to speak to you today. My name is Bill Ludbrook and I'm a descendant of Henry Williams, who together with his eldest son, Edward, translated Queen Victoria's Treaty of Waitangi into the Maori language on the 5th day of February, and which was signed by the assembled Ngāpuhi chiefs on the 6th day of February, the following day. I was born and bred and raised on Henry Williams' land, known as Poirua, Pakaraka, and Taiamai in the Bay of Islands, as were generations of my family. This land was willingly sold to Henry Williams by 16 powerful Ngāpuhi chiefs and Orakei, including Honiheki, as a farm for Henry's children in 1833. These same 16 powerful Ngāpuhi chiefs and Orakei were also signatories to Henry Williams' Treaty of Waitangi 7 years later in 1840. As a young man, I too farmed this land, like generations of my family before me. Dr. Aidan Chalice of the Science and Research Division of the Department of Conservation describes Poirua as a world-class cultural monument. It remains intact and unspoiled, as it was during Maori occupation hundreds of years ago. Henry Williams arrived in New Zealand in 1823 as an ex-Royal Navy officer. He was at this stage of his life a dedicated pacifist, ready to lead the Church Missionary Society of New Zealand. In subsequent years, he was to become known and revered by Maori throughout New Zealand for his courage as a missionary and peacemaker, and his dedication helping Maori. He was recognised by Maori throughout the country and early settlers in New Zealand as being fearless. He feared his God and therefore had no fear of men. Henry Williams had no forewarning of the arrival of Hobson to the Bay of Islands or his intentions. The missionaries hadn't even heard of the proposed Treaty of Waitangi, despite the fact they had been petitioning the British Crown for years for some form of protection from the lawless onslaught of a new tidal wave of European settlers and land buyers and escaped convicts from Australia. At 4 o'clock on the afternoon of the 5th of February, Captain William Hobson, soon to be New Zealand's first governor, visited Henry Williams at his mission station at Paihia and gave him a draft copy of the Treaty of Waitangi. He asked Henry to translate the document into Maori and informed him he would meet him at the house of James Busby at 10 o'clock the following morning, when it be read to the assembled chiefs. The love and respect he had for Maori was mutual, and he knew their immediate welfare lay in the balance. Henry was certain that without some formal protection from the British government, the future would be extremely difficult for Maori. On the 6th day of February, the chiefs told Henry Williams that their minds were made up. Henry read out his Maori version of the Treaty of Waitangi to the chiefs, explaining it to them clause by clause. Henry Williams told the Ngāpuhi chiefs at Waitangi and all other chiefs of New Zealand the authority of the land would rest with Maori, while the full authority of the government would be with the Queen. Honiheki was the first to sign at Waitangi, followed by the other chiefs, and the meeting subsequently dispersed. Out of the 549 chiefs who signed the Treaty of Waitangi throughout New Zealand, only 39 signed the English version. It was only in the English version that referred to the words, Her Majesty's Sovereign Authority. These words are not mentioned in the translation, simply because Henry Williams was cautious that Maori did not completely understand its true English meaning of the word sovereignty. Henry Williams and his son Edward used two Maori words alongside each other, kawanatanga katoa, in their translation of sovereignty, which was excellent because kawanatanga means governor or government, which Maori clearly understood, and katoa, which means complete, all-encompassing, totally, without exception, everyone and all, which Maori also clearly understood. Article 1 of the treaty states that the chiefs agreed to cede absolutely to the Queen of England forever, the complete government or kawanatanga katoa over their land. This is a clear, uncomplicated, and easy to understand article of the Treaty of Waitangi. In conclusion, some say it doesn't matter what was agreed 150.
Bill, I'm just going to interrupt you there. You're pretty much, well, you are out of time. So I'm just going to invite you to say a couple of sentences and concluding your submission.
Okay. The covenant made by our forefathers at Waitangi in 1840 is what binds us. This will continue to be true no matter how inconvenient that may be to some present-day occupiers of the great land called New Zealanders. I support this treaty principles bill simply for the intended future benefits of clarity it will bring to all New Zealanders. Thank you. End of submission.
Kia ora. Thank you, Bill. Thanks for your time and thanks for your written submission. Members, we're just moving ahead one submitter to the Ngati Whatua Orakei Trust, and we'll come back to the Youth Council if we can. So we're going to go to the Ngati Whatua Orakei Trust. And we may have Claire Rourke on. Alrighty. I've just been asked, just a few technical difficulties in the background. We're just going to suspend until 1:50, I think, are we? Yes. No, we're not. We're not. Please don't go away. I see we've got Kate Burgess there. Kia ora, Kate. I see we've got you there now. Sorry for slight confusion if there was any. But without further ado, I'll let you know you've got 10 minutes to speak to your submission. And if we've got time, there may be questions at the end. So I'll hand straight over to you. Good to see you.
Ngā mima o te komiti whiriwhiri take ture, tēnā koutou kāpua. Kia ora, my name is Whatuariki. We're each going to just briefly introduce ourselves and or why we oppose the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill as a way to demonstrate that it matters to and will affect a diverse range of young people. Personally, I strongly oppose the bill for what it is, principles that inaccurately reflect both versions of the Treaty of Waitangi for how it was developed. You do not alter a contract without the other party's agreement, and for what it will do, maintain blanket equality which does not protect Māori and condones our overrepresentation in every sector's negative statistics. Kia ora.
Kia ora. My name is Thomas Richards. I use he, him pronouns and I'm a 17-year-old student and have lived in Ōtautahi all my life. I currently serve on the executive of the Christchurch Youth Council.
Kia ora. My name is Beth Gibson. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm 18 years old. I'm currently the communications officer of the Christchurch Youth Council and I've lived in Christchurch my whole life.
Kia ora, my name is Ashwini Rajish. I use she, her pronouns and I'm 19 years old. I'm ethnically Indian and was born in the United States of America and am both a New Zealand and US citizen. I've grown up in Christchurch and consider myself both Taiohi and tangata tiriti, and I currently serve as the secretary of the Christchurch Youth Council.
Runaka Taiohi o Ōtautahi Christchurch Youth Council is a group of rangatahi volunteers aged 12 to 24 from across the Ōtautahi region. The conclusions in this deputation are based on external rangatahi survey and internal discussions and surveys with our membership of 28 volunteers aged 12 to 24. We acknowledge that we are not representative of all young people in Christchurch and that some young people may disagree with aspects or all of our deputation. We value all youth voices and encourage all young people to participate. As an organisation that supports Te Tiriti o Waitangi and our values, policies and work, we believe it is our responsibility to advocate for Te Tiriti to be honoured and upheld. In addition to this, we have a mandate from the wider Ōtautahi youth community to deliver this submission on behalf of the feedback received from our consultations.
Our survey received 45 rangatahi responses. 98% had heard of the Treaty Principles Bill. 88% strongly oppose it, viewing it as an infringement on Māori rights and a failure to address historical inequities. Many highlighted the lack of Māori consultation, with one respondent stating, quote, "The bill focuses on equality rather than equity, and further strips the rights of Indigenous Māori." Young people are calling for a genuine partnership in policy making, with one saying, quote, "Nothing about us without us." Young people believe the Christchurch Youth Council should promote Te Tiriti o Waitangi understanding, with 87% supporting education and workshops, 81% wanting platforms for rangatahi to voice their views, and 75% advocating for policies reflecting the treaty. This is why we are here today. We have heard from the wider community and see it as our responsibility to advocate and amplify.
The first element to the Christchurch Youth Council's opposition to the Treaty Principles Bill is the division it creates within the Māori Crown Partnership and thus within the nation. Young people from Christchurch felt the nature of the bill misinterprets Te Tiriti in a disingenuous manner due to the bill's expulsion of Te Tiriti's original meaning. The bill wrongly removes the ability of Māori to act as a sovereign people, and the bill's misunderstanding of tino rangatiratanga might designedly prevent Māori from growing self-sovereignty and authority. Māori have faced decades of inequality and subsequent governmental neglect, and young people highlighted that the bill reversed the enormous work done to restore the rightful place of Māori in society as sovereigns of the land and holders of the right to fairness and equality. The misdirection of policy this bill may cause could separate the strong connections formed between the Māori and the Crown over the recently developed mutual mission to do better for Māori. This risks fracturing the relationship of the Māori Crown and could lead to a generation of hardship for young people today, who would bear the responsibility of a Māori Crown relationship broken down by the Treaty Principles Bill.
The
The second D, dishonourable, further describes in a simplistic way why we oppose this bill. According to the Waitangi Tribunal, the Crown purposely did not consult with any iwi and hapu Māori, or even just Māori in general during the bill's development. They also ignored the advice and findings of lawyers and other experts who thought that the bill was poorly conceived and should be abandoned. This bill is a shameful and insulting attempt at unilaterally altering a legally binding agreement between two sovereign nations, so that the Crown does not need to honour its responsibilities and hold itself accountable for breaching Te Tiriti or Waitangi. Irrespective of whether the government chooses to acknowledge that there are two sovereign nations, you do not change a contract after it has been signed without all of the parties agreeing to the changes. The current government has blatantly chosen to accept an inaccurate, fictitious version of Te Tiriti or Waitangi. Treaty of Waitangi principles are supposed to clarify how the two versions of the treaty can be melded and upheld in spirit, ignoring the Te Reo Māori version of the treaty entirely so that we do not need to figure out how the two can coexist demonstrates an assimilationist intent towards Māori, which in turn ignores the differing worldviews of tangata whenua and the complex history of colonisation in New Zealand by essentially sweeping parts of that history under the rug with this bill. The bill also disrespects the treaty as a foundational constitutional convention of New Zealand. The term tangata tiriti, people of the treaty, of course refers to Te Tiriti or Waitangi, and is the original legal basis that gives Pākehā a right to be here and by extent Tauiwi as well. So it would be egregious to allow any Joe Blow to assist in the unilateral altering of Te Tiriti or Waitangi through democracy without even consulting hapu Māori as the sovereign fellow treaty partner that they are.
Young people in Ōtautahi feel that this bill is morally objectionable and oppose the Treaty Principles Bill because they see it as a disingenuous political distraction. This bill was described as an act of grandstanding, and people took issue with it because they see it as a waste of Parliament's time, stopping other more pressing issues from being spoken about by taking up resources and media attention. This is a very difficult time for many people. Recession, rising unemployment, and high cost of living mean people are struggling to make ends meet, pay for food, and make rent. And this sort of political show that the Treaty Principles Bill represents upsets people. This bill is perceived as insincere legislation, not actually intended to pass, as garnering parliamentary support is not the focus, just signalling to voters that there is an agenda and taking the campaigning phase of the electoral cycle too far. It is also purposefully inflammatory and does not advance us as a nation, but rather divides us. This is a greater issue which has significant and far-reaching consequences, as it erodes faith in the democratic system and contributes to the disillusionment with government for not focusing on issues that impact citizens the most. Disenfranchising young people is deeply unwise and a major mistake, as in our opinion, as a youth council.
Not only do we oppose the bill's content, but also the inappropriate time chosen to conduct the submission process over Christmas break, when people are already stressed, wrapping up for the year, seeing family, going away, or are just too exhausted to be giving their 100% to writing a submission. As a youth organisation of volunteers, we ourselves were unable to convene over summer break with everyone's different plans and had less support from our coordinator, who was rightfully on leave, so found ourselves scrambling at the end to write our submission. Personally, I almost didn't get my own submission in and was one of the hundreds of thousands of people at midnight on January 7th, mortified to have almost screwed up my opportunity to have a say. That being said, we also oppose this bill going to referendum as it would unfairly marginalise half of the youth that we represent, those aged 12 to 17 years old who are unable to vote despite this bill's ability to affect their entire future. It will also marginalise Māori, whereas the Indigenous people of Aotearoa are now a minority of the population, making up only 17% of it. And to be a rangatahi Māori is even more unfair, as around 30% of the Māori population is under the age of 18 and therefore unable to vote.
We call on the government to listen to the voices of rangatahi, to uphold the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and halt any progress on the Treaty Principles Bill. This bill is fundamentally objectionable for its divisiveness, its dishonouring of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the distraction it represents, and the issues with its delivery to public. It is essential that the government ensures genuine community and youth engagement, creating meaningful opportunities for Māori and all young people to have their voices heard, play an active role in shaping the policies that directly affect them. Future consultations must incorporate Māori and relevant party co-design and take place at appropriate times of year, ensuring that all communities have the space and time needed to fully engage. This is essential for creating and maintaining positive civic and political engagement and trust in our leadership and governance systems, which is authentic and lasting.
Thank you for your time and for listening. We'd like to use the rest of our time for any part-time.
Thank you very much. We have a very short window, so I'll go straight to Scott Willis.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the many voices in your submission. Really good submission. And you've talked about this as insincere and offensive legislation. I'm wondering, what do you think it's eating up time that we could be doing as parliamentarians rather than this dog whistle politics?
Well, like we've said in our submission, a lot of people, especially a lot of young people, students, are struggling with cost of living. They can't make rent. There is a lot of really difficult things around that. It's hard to get jobs. And I think for a lot of people in a situation like that, it is really difficult to see this kind of like division of the country when we could be banding together and helping each other.
Kia ora, thanks for that response. We haven't got any time for any more questions. But I echo Scott's words. Thanks for your really thoughtful submission and the work that you do bringing a voice to young people. So thank you for that.
Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you.
Members, we now, I believe, have Ngati Whatuariki Orakei Trust. All right, so I see we've got Sharon Hawke. And once she's got her mute off and her camera on, we should be away. Kia ora, Sharon, good to see you. Thanks for coming along. Without further ado, I'll just say we've got you for 10 minutes, so I'll hand straight over to you. And if we've got time, there may be questions at the end.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. Hey, anei te mihi kia koutou I tēnei wā. I rongo au te reo o ngā rangatahi I mua I ahau, e tēnō tautoko I a rātou. My name is Sharon Aroha Hawke. I am an elected representative of the Ngati Whatuariki Orakei Trust. I thank you for this opportunity. And I'd like to say I really support what those young ones said just before. They're pretty awesome. And I want to acknowledge, if I may, Mr. Chair, all my people at Te Matatini right at this very minute. So I want to acknowledge all those that stand and perform our art and the excellence that it sits. I take the submission as read. We had great heart and passion in preparing the submission, and really appreciate that you allowing us to also participate in the oral submission process. Ngati Whatuariki, we see ourselves as the tangata whenua of the Auckland Isthmus. Our boundaries are from Mananui, ki runga tamaki ki raro. We are the third largest landowner of the Auckland CBD. The first and the second are the Crown and Auckland Council, respectively. I'd like to mention that our three signatories of Te Tiriti were Te Kawo, Te Tinana and Te Rewati, and they signed on the shores of the Manukunuku Harbour on March the 20th, 1840. And in doing so, our chief, our rangatira, Te Kawo, offered to Governor Hobson 3,000 acres to come and settle and make the Tamaki Isthmus their capital. There were several reasons for that. One of them could have been that Ngāpuhi had the musket. We believe, Mr. Chair, that we have been a good treaty partner since that signing. We have had several interactions with the legislation process under the Waitangi Tribunal. The first was the 1978 Orakei Block Vesting and Use Act that came in when Prime Minister Muldoon of the National Party was trying to get rid of my father, Joe Hawke, and his people off Bastion Point. The second was the Orakei Act, 1991. It's a very good read, gives you a very good summary of our history as Ngāti Whātua in Tāmaki Makaurau. And the most recent is our Ngati Whatuariki Settlement Act of 2012. So we've been down this road. We are adept at knowing the principles of Te Tiriti. And in some of the research that I've been privy to, I note that there are about 54 principles that have evolved already out of Te Tiriti. And this bill proposes to whitewash those 54 plus principles for 3 that abide my people no rights, afford my people no acknowledgement in the relationship that we've had with the Crown, and it strips the fabric of where we've been heading for in the last 3 decades at improving our people's ability to gain education, gain warm housing, gain good health. This is a very bad design for a bill, may I just add that, mainly because the partner that it impacts upon was never engaged. This is not engagement. This whole process of select committee oral submission is not proper engagement in terms of the designing of something that's going to impact on our future. It also leads me to point out that in order for us to have a relationship, there must be trust and there must be honour in order for us to go forward. And quite frankly, the bill and its 3 principles kind of pollute the idea of a future together. We had rights prior to the signing of the treaty. We had dominion over our own lands prior to the signing of Te Tiriti. The signing of Te Tiriti by my tupuna, who I've named earlier, was in order to protect us from what they could see, and through their eyes, they saw a settler government, a settler population that wasn't making head or tail of who we were as Ngati Whātua. Once upon a time, we had dominion over 80,000 acres. It was dwindled down by the 1950s to a 1/4 acre cemetery. When you oppress a people for so long, they rise, and we did. We now have over 300 homes which we've been able to develop for our people. We have in excess of 160 hectares that we've bought back from the Crown in this settlement process. Te Tiriti provides us with enduring rights. So whether or not this bill goes to heaven or hell, those rights will remain because we will protect it. We will do everything within our ability with honour and respect to fight for the freedom of our children and our grandchildren. This bill, if it goes through, it basically whitewashes and ends the partnership. This is how serious it feels, and this is how serious it's going to get. You know, we believe in honour. Every Indigenous society believes in honour. I'm sure each of you have touched honour in your lives. We want that to remain. We need it to remain. We don't want to squabble over equality versus equity. You all know the stats of health, of education, unemployment, lack of housing. Māori top each of those statistics. Still, there's been no advancement in the health area. Still, we ourselves have taken great umbrage and have worked towards insuring ourselves under a private health insurance in order to address the unwellness of our people. Now, this is the obligation of the Crown as well, but I'm afraid that their obligation is slipping, and it will slip even further if this bill goes through. So the intent of this bill, I believe, is to elevate the oppression of my people. I come from good fighting stock. we will continue to show our opposition to this. Our children are our gold. We will do whatever it takes to protect their legacy. In the same way, our tupuna who I've mentioned protect ours. O reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, and ngā mihi, thank you for your heartfelt and powerful oral submission, and also your written submission. We've got a little bit of time available, members, if anyone wants to ask a question. I see Scott Willis has a question.
Thank you, Sharon, and really appreciate your submission, your oral submission just now, and the written one. And you've said in the written submission that the bill, if passed, is likely to lead to more complex and extended litigation. If the bill isn't to proceed, isn't it time to end the fiasco of this bill now? Or what do you have thoughts on that?
Well, we're looking forward to the promises of the national partner in the Crown, as it is the makeup of the coalition government, that it's not even go to its second reading. I think the country will jump for joy. Ngati Whatuariki will bow its head and say thank you, that this silliness has to stop.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Look, that brings us pretty much to the end of the time available, but once again, thanks
really?
for your submission. I know, it goes so fast.
All good. Thanks so much.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Mauri ora.
Members, our next submitter is Te Runaka or Koukourarata, and I think we have Mananui Ramsden submitting on behalf. Kia ora, Mananui, good to see you there. We've set aside 10 minutes to hear from you on your submission. So without further ado, I'll head straight over to you. Kia ora.
Ka pai. Kei ka matatini o te whare e tū mai nei tēnei au e mihi ana kia tātou. My name is Mananui Ramsden, kia o te Runaka o Koukourarata, and I take my submission as read. We, te Runaka o Koukourarata, oppose this bill. Our whakapapa, te Runaka o Koukourarata draws our collective mana from 3 waves of migration. The first, through Rakai Hautu traditions, connects us with Waitaha. Second, the ahuriri links us to Kati Māmoe. The third, the wakamaka few ties us to Kaitahi. Through these iwi, our bloodlines descend through Tai Tū Haitara, Hāke Tū Te Huerewa, and Kāti Huika. Today we recognised as Kāti Huikai within the 18 Papatipi Runaka o Kaitahi. Our takiwā extends from Koukourarata to Poatu, up to Hupātiki and down the Kaituna River, flows into Te Waihora. We also hold interests mai puari ki puari. Our connection to our moana reaches outside the 200 nautical mile mark. Our references of these are the tauraka waka o te wakamaka whiu, te awhānui o te wakamaka whiu, and of course, te tai o mahani. Our historical relationship with te Tiriti o Waitangi. European contact took place in Te Wāhi Pounamu well beyond a year before our cousins in Tika Maui. Our rich marine resources attracted waves of settlers, leading to an increase of pressure on our tauka. On the 30th of May, 1840, 2 rakatira signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi e Takapuneke, those being Tikau and Irito and Tāti Huikai. The decision was not taken lightly, but it was made to protect and strengthen our people and those that lived within our takiwā. Dr. Webb, Mr. Chair, you may remember Takapuneke and the importance of our kōrero when you attended Te Rāua o Waitangi this year at Rūnaka. 9 years later, our treaty partner subjects demanded more. Walter Mantell was sent to acquire our land for the lowest possible price. In a coerced transaction, Crown claimed over 121,000 acres for a price of £300, forcing us from our whātuturu, from our kaika tuturu, onto a reservation a little over 1,000 361 acres known as the Port Levy Reservation 874. Thus 1.6% of our original takiwa. Mantel's final offer amounted into today's context to 33 cents per acre, secured through colonial coercion backed by military force. Our claim. The Kaitahu claim, Y27, stands as one of Aotearoa's most significant treaty claims. The claim took nearly 34.5 million acres throughout deeds like Kent, Kopipa, Murihuku, Parua, North Canterbury, Kakaura, Arahura, Rakiura, and of course, the Port Levy deed. Promises of land reservations, economic stability, and access to resources were broken, rendering us landless and economically disadvantaged. For over 150 years, our tipuna fought for justice through petitions and legal battles. In 1991, the Waitangi Tribunal confirmed the Crown's breaches of Te Tiriti. This led to the Kaitahu Claim Settlement Act 1998, providing $170 million in compensation, less than 1% of our actual economic loss. Alongside this, we gained cultural regress and perhaps most importantly, an official apology from the Crown. Then Prime Minister Jenny Shipley acknowledged the Crown's failure and our enduring mana and tino rakatirataka. Yet today, under this bill, those failures persist. Principle 1. This principle claims that the executive government and parliament have full governing power over Aotearoa, and it is missing tino rakatirataka guaranteed under Te Tiriti. It wrongfully assumes the Crown is the sole authority, elevating Kaiwhakapumau above iwi and tapu Māori. This disadvantages This distorts Article 1, shifting Te Tiriti from a partnership to a toxic Crown dominant. We, hekama, are not your rehab. Problem. This claim, this principle, disregards our mana and diminishes our ability to take care of our whenua, moana, and whānau. It undermines our tino rakatirataka of Te Runaka o Koukourarata and our whanauka from other moka. Principle 2. This principle claims that the Crown will respect iwi and hapu rights, but only as outlined in treaty settlements. This restricts recognition of our rights to what the Crown chooses, freezing them in time and denying our ability to evolve. I need not remind us all that we are not the radicals. Problem. The Crown places itself as a sole arbiter of Māori rights, limiting tino rakatirataka to past settlements. This bill threatens our hard-won gains in the Kaitahu Claim Settlement Act 1998, forcing costly legal battles, as mentioned earlier, to reassert our mana. Our whakapapa, tikaka, and mana are not confined to Crown definition settlements. They are defined by our moka, our awa, and our moana. Principle 3. This principle claims protection under the law, but erases unique rights guaranteed to Māori under Te Tiriti. It conflates equality with equity, ignoring systemic injustices caused by colonisation, essentially a modern-day rights grab by the Crown yet again. Problem. It undermines Article 2, which ensures our rights to whenua, taopa, and tino rakatirataka. By blending Article 2 with Article 3, this Crown erases our whakapapa and our cultural identity, dismantling Māori into a system that disregards our mana whenua status. In conclusion, Te Runaka o Koukourarata strongly opposes this bill, which distorts Te Tiriti, diminishes our tino rakatirataka, and ignores the Crown's duty to actively protect iwi and hapu. Our whakapapa, tikaka, and mana are not subject to political convenience. Our tipuna, like iwi kau and tikau, upheld Te Tiriti as a sacred covenant for all. As kaitaki of our takiwa, we must protect their legacy for the future of our people. Today, I call on the government to honour Te Tiriti, uphold partnership and protection, and work with iwi and hapu to build a future that respects the values and mana of all people in Aotearoa. Tēnā tātou.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for that submission, and just the narration of some of the history of Kaitahu and the deeds which the signing of the treaty and the unfair deeds, both of which weren't honoured in spirit or letter as time passed. Just wonder if you want to comment on how this current piece of legislation makes you feel against the background of those previous breaches.
Yeah, that's a good question, and thank you. My day-to-day mahi with my people is not one of casting our eyes into the future at the stars. I really wish it was. In fact, what my time is spent on is uplifting us out of poverty. As a result of this history that I've just referred to, which clearly doesn't define us, it's forced us into a state of poverty, still to this day. So to answer your question, it's infuriating. And I must admit, I also know there's a little bit of element within me that it doesn't reflect Aotearoa New Zealand. So I have confidence in that as well.
Kia ora. Thank you for that. We've got a very little bit of time left. Anyone else want to ask a question? If not, we'll leave it there. There's only 20 seconds left, so we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your submission. Really well put. And can I just say, good written submission as well. So thank you very much. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you for your time.
And I think we have Maranga Maya working group on the People's Action Plan Against Racism now. And I see we've got Tina Nata here to present to us. Tina, we've got you for 10 minutes. So I'll just hand straight over to you and the time's yours. We may have questions at the end. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you. I'll try to be as succinct as I can. Yes, ko tēnā ngata tōku ingoa, he mokopuna tēnei no te whānau a Henerupe, te whānau a Karuwai ki Marae Hara Ngāti Horowai anō hoki, no Ngāti Porou, whānau whānui a wau. Tēnā tātou. I would like to start off by just acknowledging I'm here as a part and a representative for the National Iwi Chairs group Maranga Mai. We are a working group for the People's Action Plan Against Racism. And I'd like to just highlight our working definition of racism for the plan. The definition is that racism is a collection of ideas, actions, and institutional practices backed by institutional and social power that produce, maintain, and normalise inequity and inequality for tangata whenua and other racialised groups in Aotearoa. And understanding and identifying what racism is partly confounded by the fact that people have mischaracterized it as only existing in its most extreme form. Usually, how they characterize it is people carrying burning crosses and seeking to lynch other people. But if we look at that person carrying the burning cross and a lynch rope, leading all the way up to that most extreme manifestation, a series of ways of thinking and acting that are allowed to culminate in extreme racism because people don't think that thing they did earlier was racist, that thing they thought earlier was racist, that thing that they said earlier was racist. You don't have to be a cross-carrying Nazi in order to be a white supremacist. You just have to believe that whiteness is innately better. You just have to believe that white people are innately more rational and intelligent. You just have to believe that white science is more valid, that white law is more just, that white stories are more relatable or white economies are more productive. You just have to believe that white systems of governing are more effective.
And whatever you might say or think, those are not radical or unusual assumptions for many people in our government or indeed in society today. But it's precisely those ideas which have allowed white supremacy to fly under the radar all the way up to its most brutal manifestation. It's one of the reasons why white identity extremism is the dominant domestic terrorism threat in Aotearoa. It's because people only see white supremacy as a burning cross, not as somebody who simply thinks that European ways are superior. This way of thinking is absolutely what allowed colonialism to travel around the world and embed itself in the soil and the formation of early settler governments. But it's also this way of thinking that has allowed it to persist and endure within colonial governments. And as we have submitted, it is our studied and researched and verified opinion that it is the same mentality which sits behind the logic and content of this bill. The Select Committee, I've been watching the oral hearings up to now. I know you've heard from many people who have said that this bill, in logic and content, takes a very narrow approach to understanding te tiriti and a very narrow approach to understanding equity. We submit that it has also taken a deliberately narrow approach to defining and understanding racism. Minister Seymour has made numerous claims in his submission around the nature and definition of racism that I have to say, frankly, are straight wrong. There are suggestions that te tiriti and tiriti responsive policies are forms of legal racism, which divide New Zealand into racial categories, and that is the definition of racism. That is an outdated and conveniently crude approach to understanding racism. Te tiriti does not divide people into racial categories. That was already done through the colonial process. And acknowledging difference is exactly what sits at the heart of statistical research, which the government bases much of its policy legislation and expenditure on anyway. So the harm of racism doesn't sit in classification of difference. It comes with the application of a hierarchy that suggests that your difference makes you better. It comes when one group believes that the difference that they have makes them more human and therefore more entitled to human rights than another group. And the real harm kicks in when power is applied to those assumptions to give effect to them. Racism cannot be correctly understood in the absence of power. Te Tiriti o Waitangi is a treaty and it's a human rights document. It was signed to protect our Māori inherent and fundamental human rights. And those rights include our maintaining our ways of living and our ways of governance from colonial domination. It provided a legitimate place for the Crown with limitations, and it is the Crown who has been errant historically, repeatedly, in acknowledging those limitations. And that is a standalone, enduring, and we submit, parental act of racism, from which many other expressions of racism have flown, including this bill. It's an agreement, Te Tiriti o Waitangi is an agreement between political authorities and ngā rangatira o ngā hapu o Aotearoa, particularly, and the Crown. And, you know, as has been attested to from within the United Nations, it is an enduring treaty. And these findings that Te Tiriti o Waitangi is enduring, is relevant, and must be constitutionally protected have been reaffirmed by nearly every transnational human rights accountability mechanism that there is. The Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Working Group for the Universal Periodic Review of Human Rights, the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and numerous United Nations rapporteurs have added their voice to that of the Waitangi Tribunal in their upholding of Te Tiriti and recommendations that it needs to be constitutionally protected. So if this government is saying that it knows better, not only than the Tribunal and judiciary, but also more than its own independent human rights watchdog, and also more than the international community and human rights bodies responsible for setting the standards of human rights around the world, well, that appears to me to be an astounding display of arrogance. And actually, it's this bill that is out of step with judicial process and international governance norms and standards, not, as Minister Seymour has suggested, our approach to Indigenous rights. So when we speak to the racism of this bill, we do so from a space that is supported by research, expertise, and international jurisprudence. We consider it to be racist in logic and in content. It has caused racial tension and harm and heightened instances of hate towards Māori just through the current process thus far. It's also caused racialised impacts by forcing Māori to mobilise against it. The referendum would compound that racialised harm, and any further progression of this bill would only cause more racial harm, which is why it is our emphatic recommendation that it be abandoned. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you for that. We have a little bit of time for questions if anyone has one. If there's no one's quick enough, I will certainly ask a question. Look, this bill sits along a program of work of the government in respect of te reo, te ao Māori, and treaty. And you've mentioned the racism issue and your work on racism. How is that impacting on the work that you're doing?
Well, it's meant that I've had to abandon a whole lot of other work. It's nearly a full-time job just responding to the racialised impacts of the work streams that are involved. And thank you very much for bringing up those adjacent work streams, because the vast majority of this is coming out of the coalition agreement of this government. And this entire government, although of course this is being championed and proposed by the ACT Party, but it's actually something that comes out of the coalition agreement, which should be condemned in and of itself. This government was formed upon an agreement which has abuses of human and Indigenous rights within that agreement. It should never have been the basis for the formation of a government.
Kia ora. Look, Tina, thank you for your submission. Thank you for your written submission. Thank you for the work that you're doing with your action plan as well. So we're out of time, so we'll have to leave it there. But thank you very, very much.
Tēnā koutou.
The next submitter is Ngati Wai Trust Board. Excuse me. Right, so the next submitter is the Ngati Wai Trust Board. Just trying to Apurahama Edwards, I think, will be our submitter. You know, he's just coming online now. Kia ora, good to see you all there. Thanks for taking the time to be available for this oral submission. We've got you for 10 minutes, so I'll hand straight over to you. There may be some questions at the end, so kia ora.
Kia ora, tira, tēnei rā mātou. E mea nanga kōrero au mātou mātua tūpuna. Ka tangi atu kai aia ki te moana, ko Ngāti Wai ko te moana e haere ana. Ka tangi atu kai aia ki te tua whenua, ko Ngāti Wai ko te tua whenua e haere ana. Turu turu ātai, turu turu āuta. Whano tū mai te tokia haumi e, ui e, tāi ki e. Ko ngā mana katoa o Ngāti Wai kei te wai, kei te moana, kei ngā taniwha me o rātou manao. Tēnei rā mātou, e whakakanohi nei i te ākaurua o Ngāti Wai, me ona tini kōpikotanga, ki te taunaki, i tā mātou tāpaitanga whakahe i tēnei pire kino, e tohe nei, kia tahuri, i ngā ki taurangi i oti, i o mātou tūpuna mātua, me ngā Mananui o te krauna. I roto i taua kawena ta tapu, e mea ana ka mau tonu o mātou tupuna ki te tinoranga tiratanga, ki runga i o mātou whenua, kāinga, taonga katoa. Ki tā mātou titiro, ko te mahi kuhu kei tēnei pire, e whai tonu ana i tā te krauna mahi i roto i te tahirau, waru te kaumāri matau, arā te whakakahore, te whakawaimeha, te whakaiti, te takahi, i te tino rangatiratanga o te iwi Māori, i ki aia, ke tangata whenua. Ko taua mana, he mana tuku iho, he taura tā ngai. Kāti, ko te taharua o tēnei pire, e whai ana kia rahi ake te mana o te kāwanatanga. Ki runga ki tēnei whenua, ki Aotearoa, anei rā mātou e whakahea atu nei. Kei konei, e tahi o mātou taiohi, hei whakapuaki i ngā whakaarua te iwi.
Tirohi aroto, e mana tuku iho, e rongo haka iria. Uia ngā ota kia ita, haka mauara kia tika. Rapua i te ara, taita mari ki mā, karea te ahuri-huri, ahuri-huri. Tā te kōrero e mea ana, kua hau he raukura mo te iwi, he rangatira mo a pōpō. Aha koa he rangatahi, ko te pai aru, o te raukura he rapu rangatiratanga. Ko tātou o te iwi o Ngati wai, e haka he nuitia ana i tēnei pire, haka oti atu me nei momo wero ki taku au Māori. He reo rangatahi tēnei e haka kanohi ana i taku whānau, i taku hapu, o tira ngā rangatahi katoa o te iwi o Ngati wai. Tēnei te tira hau, he Hawaii ki mokopuna te whai nei, pai mai rā ki au. Tēnei he uri o ngā rangatira o Ngati wai, ko henare kaupeka Piripi, ko morere kai kaupeka Piripi ngā tūpuna, ko waitangi teina Piripi ahau. Tēnei te heke ngā rangi, te heke ngā wairua, te heke ngā toto o waku tūpuna. Ka tūau i raro i te mana o aku kāwai rangatira, rātou i hainatia i te tiriti o waitangi, rātou i hāpaitia i te tiriti, rātou hoki i raupatuhia i te korenga tikanga i te tinihanga o wētahi atu. E haka kāhore ana i tēnei pire i raro i te tūpono, ke haka haumarutia i ngā reanga mokopuna e haere ake nei. Kia whai mana te reo tōpū o te rangatahi, kia pua wai hoki te rangatahi i ngā tatau o tōna ake whare. Ko tātou o Ngati wai e whai ana tēnei mea te Hawaii ki mokopuna. Hoi nā no tēnā, ka haka kapi i aku kōrero, i aku takinga kōrero i konei, tō te ro kāwana ake.
Tēnā tātou te iwi, ko te rangituki waho taku ingoa, he uri tēnei no Ngati wai, no te whānau rangi whakaahu hoki. Ko aku mana Māori motu hake, taku mana rangatiratanga, taku mana tuku iho, he rete ki taku tupuna a Manaia, he maunga tū te ao, tū te pō e kore e neke. Tana mātenga e titi ana ki te rangi. Ona pakiaka e toro hohonu ana ki te whenua. Aha koa tū ana ki uta, tū ana ki tai, ao te pō te ao. Ko te ākauro o Ngati wai me ona tini kōpikopikotanga e whakahe pau te kaha ana ki tēnei pire takahi te tiro rangatiratanga a Ngati wai. O tira te iwi Māori. Ko hau, he reo mo ngā mokopuna, mo ngā kāinga o Ngati wai, ko hau hoki, he reo mo aku tūpuna, i ki taurangi ai ki roto i te tiriti o waitangi, ka mau tonu mātou ki tō mātou tino rangatiratanga, ki o mātou kāinga, whenua, me o mātou tāonga katoa. Ko te whāinga o tēnei pire, he takahi i tērā ki taurangi, i roto i te tiriti o waitangi. I te tau ko pahure, i hikoi au, mai te tai tokerau ki pōneke, i roto i te rārangi arataki i te hikoi, arā ngā kaikau i te pena. I te taha o aku whanaunga, o tira, te tini raumano tangata, i haka haruru, i te motu ki ngā tapu wai, hei whakaatu, i te whakahe ki tēnei pire. I muri iho, i hoki mātou, ki te awhi, i aku whanaunga, ki te tuku tā paitanga whakahe, he ko atu i te 2 tā paitanga i kohikohia e ngā taiohi o Ngati wai, ko tukua ki tō aroa. Ko te kupu tēnei a ngā taiohi o Ngati wai. E kore mātou e whakai kia taureka rekatia aua ki taurangi. Toi tū te tiriti, toi tū te tino rangatiratanga o Ngati wai, toi tū te mana motu hake. Tira, ngā whakaaro a Ngati wai, e whakahe atu nei i tēnei pire. He pātai wā mātai mō koutou.
I thank you for that. Look, we've got about a minute left. If anyone has, can I just say the submission and all of the comments from the people that you spoke to and got opinions from was really useful. Scott Willis has a question.
Sorry, we have questions for the panel.
It's not quite how it works. I actually had an interaction with the interpreter there, but we don't really, we're not in a position to answer questions. Our job is to listen to you and try to understand your thoughts on this bill. We're not here to defend this bill. And in fact, the party whose minister put this bill forward isn't on this particular select committee. But if you've got time, we'll let Scott ask a question of you and ask of you.
Kia ora, and thank you so much. So I've paid attention, and in the context of history where Maori have had so much taken, and the present day systemic bias that gives so many negative outcomes in health, life expectancy, education, the justice system, how misleading is it to suggest that Maori have privilege? This is something we've been hearing from some submitters.
Aira, tirohia, ko te whenua, whānakotia, ko ngā ki taurangi o te tiriti o Waitangi, ko tahi rau, waru te kaumāri matau, e whakakahoreti ana, e takataka hingi ana. Ko te mana whiriwhiri, ko te mana whakatau, i ngā take nui mo Aotearoa, e mau ana, e te mana kāwana anake. Kei hia, te oranga, mo te ao Māori, ka ore kei te kapu o te ringa o te kāwana, kei te kapu o te ringa te ao Māori, ma te ao Māori tōnā pōpō e waihanga e whakarite e whakatau. Tirohia ngā whare here here, ki ana i te Māori, ko ngā kino katoa, e puta nei runga i te ao Māori, nā te ahai, nā te takahi, i ngā ki taurangi o te tiriti o Waitangi.
Got it. Thank you for that. Thank you for submission, and thank you for all three of you, especially the rangatahi, for coming on and giving us your views on this bill. It's really appreciated. So, kia ora, thank you for that. Members, our next submitter is Daniel Lord, who we have 5 minutes.
Great, thank you very much. I'll turn on the video as well.
Yes, I can see you there, Daniel. Probably seen how it goes. I'll hand straight over to you. We've got you for 5 minutes, including any questions we may have.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you, committee, for letting me come and present to you. It is actually quite an honor. This is the first time in my life I've been able to actually present to a very senior group of people like yourselves anywhere in my life or around the world, actually. As you can probably tell from my accent and my letter, I'm not originally from New Zealand, so I'm probably speaking from a slightly different perspective. Being a New Zealand citizen now for a number of years and arriving in the country 15 years ago, I've come to appreciate not just my background prior to New Zealand, but also my experience within New Zealand. And I think I'd like to start off with, I've had the honor of actually listening to some of the other attendees as well. And one of the things that comes most to mind with my feedback is not at all meant to actually change or shift what people have been saying and expressing because of their long histories inside New Zealand. I'd rather focus a bit more on what the future portends and maybe some suggestions as to how to better construct that future together. And I'm thinking particularly for not just my family, but also my children and God bless, also with grandchildren, etc., here in New Zealand. So the first thing I'd like to say is I'm not at all here to challenge whether past agreements in treaty, particularly with regards to the treaty, should be re-litigated or re-looked at. Not at all. My full expectation is that we acknowledge and we continue to support, and that in many ways it's a lot more around what does that future look like. So I'd like to cover a couple of things. In my experience, one of the countries I spent most of my adult life in was in South Africa, and this was just starting post the transformation into democracy, and then going through the manifestations of that. Two things come most to mind. One is that redressing wrongs that have taken place and still take place, it requires a community, and it requires a concerted effort amongst all the participants and citizens of a country. To be led and only led by one group versus another group invariably tends to, in South Africa, tend to tear it apart. And my experience is that in New Zealand, we're already off to actually, I think, a very good start on that. What I would like to say is that for New Zealand, and this comes to play, I guess, for children and grandchildren, so taking the long-term horizon, is that I've come to appreciate that there's a slight difference between living on the land and then living in the land. And I'm fast including myself into this, is that I love the land and the history and the people that come with this land. And that includes the people that have arrived, quote, post-colonialism, as well as prior to that. If we're going to have a shared sovereignty or even potentially differences between the groups, again, not trying to say that we should not be redressing the wrongs of the past, but if we don't have an equitable and fair basis for all the citizens and participants in this community that we call New Zealand going forward, what ends up happening is that potentially the assets of the land and the people and other things that pertain to the cultural aspects of who we are as a nation belong to one group, and the other group is potentially excluded from that. And in my experience overseas, again in South Africa and other places in the world, is that this is very fraught and it can be very, very tricky. So I think in many ways we're going in the right direction with the Treaty Principles Bill. The two aspects that most spoke to me in that particular bill was around the equitable basis for all citizens of the country. And then the second is the democratic means of being able to resolve some of those differences, or at least to find a way through the process of reaching that unity and unified community, I guess, in the future. The second is that with a shared destiny for all the people of New Zealand in the future, and not just for today, we're going to actually be requiring many different groups, however we want to define those groups, whether it be rich, poor, different racial groups, different racial mindset groups, etc. It's going to require a sense of sacrifice and compromise. And I would like to think that we can all approach ourselves on the equal footing for my children's sake, and I think for many other children in this country, irrespective of our backgrounds. I think there's actually a lot of willingness in the children to say, listen, the clouds are building on the horizon for many nations of this world as the world goes through a lot of changes. We don't know really what the next 5, 10, particularly 20 or 30 years looks like, but we do have a sense that it's going to be more challenging, potentially not less so, which means that we need to pull our resources together and have that shared destiny. So if that means that we need to construct the framework with which that unity can take place, I would like to think that we could actually look at it today rather than parking that conversation for the future.
Yeah, hey, Daniel, that is pretty much time. So if you've got a concluding sentence, now's the time for it.
Great. So thank you. The last point I'd like to make is I think there is no great one single model in this world. So when we talk about international organizations, whether it be United Nations or others, I would like to think that we ourselves, no one is better suited to actually making precedent and making good progress on this than New Zealand for New Zealand. Let's look for the best around the world, but I think it's going to need to come from us in terms of the solution. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Daniel. That brings us over time. So thanks for your submission. No time for questions, but thanks for your written submission, which we have, and your oral submission as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Members, Philip Kuruvilla is our next submitter, whom we have for 5 minutes.
Am I in?
Yes, we can't yet see you, Philip, but we can proceed audio only if that's your preference.
No, video was my preference.
Okay.
Sorry, something gone wrong with my video. I will continue, not wasting any more time. Very good afternoon. Can I?
Yes, just okay. You've got 5 minutes, so time's over to you now.
Thank you. Very good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I am Philip Kuruvilla, a self-employed accountant by profession, a naturalized citizen of this beautiful country with Indian heritage. I have been living here since last 23 years. I made my written representation considering it is my duty to raise the voice to upkeep the greatness of this little nation and not because of any affiliation with a particular group or flag. Given my background, I have first-hand experience of what poverty is and how hard it is to make a way in life if the social system is not conducive, even if you work hard. I consider New Zealand as a society doing extremely well in taking care of the disadvantaged and providing sufficient opportunities for people to build their dream life within the limitations as a small island nation, provided they work for it. This I am telling from my own experience, living here for over 2 decades, bringing up my 2 daughters, and fortunately watching their children growing up now. I would like that to continue for the generations to come. I'm really grateful for the system and supportive attitude of our society. Not for that, my life would have been very difficult 25 years back as a stranger to this country. I would like that to prevail for the future generations. Though I am not an expert in politics, my life experience living in different places and countries, interacting with people from many countries, race, religion, both from developed and developing nations, give me an understanding that society where people are prioritized based on race or religion has never resulted in good outcomes. We can watch that happening in some parts of the world even now. If you drill down into the intricacies of how this happens, mostly it is a result of power struggle or vote bank politics rather than an honest desire for social well-being. It is not difficult to drum up and misuse the emotions of the people with half-truths and ignorant views of reality, especially in the modern day of social platforms. Unfortunately, in the past few years, I have noticed a change in the thinking process, at least with a section of our loving, caring, and wonderful little country with terminologies like partnership and co-governance in our liberal democratic setup, which for me, as I understand from many whom I interact with, a bit of a concern as to where it is going to take us. As many journalists and commentators say, we are a much divided society now than in the many years of recent past. Due to this rhetoric and activism, this fact should not be ignored. It is better to have a well-informed debate or due diligence from all quarters and a decision taken by people as to which way we proceed to build up a productive and successful nation for the current and future generations rather than debating on what happened historically. This bill, if passed by the Parliament, will give a legitimate opportunity for such a debate and conversation. In the end, as usual, sense will prevail and a good outcome will come out of that. As a matured society, I don't see any reason why we should shy away from such a debate. Given these circumstances, I strongly feel that this bill, Principles of Treaty of Waitangi Bill, should be passed by the Parliament. Once again, thank you all for listening to me, and namaste.
Namaste, thank you for that, Philip. And look, members, we have a brief amount of time for questions if anyone has one. Yes, Scott Willis has a question. From mute.
Thank you, Philip. Here we go. Thank you, Philip. rather than a well-informed debate, however, if one party to an agreement, the Crown, which is currently held captive by an 8% minor party, wants to change the agreement between the Crown and Māori, wouldn't it be more sensible for the descendants of the rangatira who were the original signatories of Te Tiriti, wouldn't it be better if they were involved? Wouldn't it be better to have a respectful national dialogue than simply one small party trying to impose their will?
Yeah, my view on that is that this bill is not changing anything what is written or historical fact. It is opening up an opportunity for people to say, because there are, things have passed, a lot of water has gone under the bridge from the day of the treaty, and the demographic structure of the country has changed. And if the country needs a change in the laws and how we look at things, and it has to be done timely. That is the purpose of the parliament we have, and that is the fundamental of the liberal democracy. So why can't we have an open discussion, and whatever the people think, we go in that way, and there is no need to be paranoid about that discussion or whatever debate happening in. Why? I mean, if there is a fact,
Philip, we're going to interrupt you because we're well over time now. But I think you have answered the question. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
For your submission. Kia ora. Members, we now have Ngā Ranga the Māori Law Students Association of Victoria University. And I think we've got Aria and Kaya. Here we are. Kia ora. Good to see you there. We've got you for 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do is just hand straight over to you. And if we've got time at the end, there may be some questions. Kia ora.
Ka pai. Tuatahi, tēnei rā te mihi atu ki a koutou, te kōmiti whiriwhiri, tēnei mātou e whakakanohi ana i a ngā ranga hautira. Good afternoon. Today I'm joined by Aria Ngārimu, Tamati Durie-McGrath, and this submission is made for and on behalf of Ngā Ranga Hautira, also known as the Māori Law Students Association of Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington, and its law reform subsidiary, Ngā Kaiwhakapumau. Very quickly about who we are. Ngā Ranga Hautira has a membership of approximately 300 Māori students studying towards a Bachelor of Laws at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. Ngā Ranga Hautira encourages its members to form educated opinions on contemporary Māori issues, make submissions on a range of proposed legislation, and organise regular hui, which provide opportunities for Māori students to discuss and debate legal issues relevant to Māori. From the outset, we want to make it clear that Ngā Ranga Hautira strongly opposes this bill. We take submissions as read, and in the interest of time, and given that most of the key points have already been addressed, Aria and Tamati will speak directly to our main points, and then we intend to leave some time for questions. Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora koutou. I'm just going to start off. As law students, we feel an obligation to comment on some of the legal aspects of this bill, and moreover the lack of integrity that this bill has in legal terms. The major issue here is that the bill is a complete misrepresentation of both Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi. I don't really want to spend long on this point because frankly, it's quite embarrassing to New Zealand's legislative drafting reputation. It just completely reinterprets the text in a way that doesn't actually reflect what they say. Furthermore, there's just a blatant disregard for international law, including the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties 1969, which was ratified by the New Zealand government in 1971. And essentially what that convention says in terms of treaty interpretation is that they must be interpreted in good faith. Now, as a matter of the rule of law, good governance, and just plain common sense, we don't agree that anyone, including the government, should have the power to unilaterally redefine a bilateral agreement. It completely flies in the face of all the efforts put in by both Māori and by the Crown over many decades to move forward as a nation under Te Tiriti. One of the talking points that we've heard around this bill is that we need to have a debate about Te Tiriti. We agree, we should have a debate about Te Tiriti. And I think, Scott, you raised this point in the last submission that there hasn't actually been a debate, nevertheless a conversation. This has been the attempt of a far-right party to exploit our MMP democratic system to push forward this bill that doesn't reflect the pathway that we've been on as a nation to have an honest and constructive conversation about our future in a way that respects the autonomy of the communities that make up our diverse nation. And before I pass over to Tamati, I want to share some of the recent interactions that we as Ngā Rangahautere, the Māori Law Student Society at Victoria University, have had in interacting with Indigenous law groups from the University of Melbourne and the University of Dalhousie, so both from Australia and Canada. Melbourne came over last year following the introduction of the bill. And while the purpose of the exchange was to share insights and knowledge about our experiences as Indigenous people and the law, things that we've learned, a lot of the conversation actually revolved around the introduction of the bill. We soon noticed the similarity of our struggle with this bill to their Voice to Parliament referendum, which failed on a federal scale last year. Legal academics from Melbourne believe that this outcome could be attributed to misinformation and fear-mongering from right-wing parties and silencing their Indigenous voice. And we believe that we're seeing similar themes play out here under this bill. Similarly, the students and staff from Dalhousie shared their sympathies with us and encouraged us to keep striving for better. That was really interesting to speak to them because in Canada, the First Nations people there have multiple treaties with the Canadian government that work to some extent. Absolutely, no treaty is perfect. We can see that with our own treaty and the way it's enacted, but we certainly could take some things from their book. Ultimately, in the global field of Indigenous law, this bill is just embarrassing and represents a major regression for Aotearoa New Zealand. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. This bill claims to advocate for equality and for the equal protection of fundamental human rights. This has nothing to do with Te Tiriti, and the suggestion that equality is undermined by Te Tiriti is a lie. This bill misrepresents the constitutional relationship between Māori and the Crown. The relationship established by Te Tiriti o Waitangi is not about special privileges, but an agreement between two sovereign states who created obligations to one another. The notion of absolute equality overlooks historical reality. Te Tiriti o Waitangi was signed between two distinct peoples who came together as equals to forge a partnership. This partnership acknowledges and respects their differences while establishing their own respective responsibilities. To suggest that all should simply be equal now undermines this fundamental agreement and the legitimate constitutional status of Māori as treaty partners. Equality does not entail the robotic treatment of people exactly the same as one another, and in doing so would ignore their unique characteristics. If we were to embrace true equality, we would honour and protect Te Tiriti as a constitutional document that gives all New Zealanders the right to be here. Progress as a nation requires acknowledging that our differences are not obstacles to overcome, but a major strength in our constitutional arrangements. The path forward is simple. Honouring the treaty does not compromise equality. To put this into an example, we have grown as a nation past what this bill represents. The Council of Legal Education's decision to input tikanga into all mandatory courses into the new curriculum is a testament to this. We are now at a place with the principles of the treaty that institutions like these are willing to recognise the application of principles into the next generation of this country. The path forward is clear. Honouring Te Tiriti does not compromise equality, it strengthens it. This bill seeks to undo this progress by replacing our constitutional partnership with a simplified version of equality that serves no one. We once again urge you to reject this bill and continue our journey as a nation that draws strengths from our constitutional arrangements, not denying them. With that, that concludes our submission. We are now open for questions.
Kia ora. Look, I'm going to abuse my position as chair and ask the first question. I hope we get to two. As Māori law students, you're probably better placed than many to talk about the fact that, and you mentioned tikanga, that the bill before us looks like it adopts very much a sort of 19th century English constitutional law approach. And here we are in a legal system which has more than one thread. Can you talk about a tikanga approach to how we might address the challenges which this bill purports to address? It's not an exam question.
I think simply put, the way that the law stands now, and I think it's only right to acknowledge the progress that's been made to get to this point, where tikanga and the treaty is now accessible to law students in institutions that are designed to educate. And I think if we consider the progress we've made and the lack of education and the ignorance that currently exists because of the deprivation of education of te tiriti and tikanga across New Zealand, I think we're seeing with this bill that the ACT Party has been trying to exploit that ignorance rather than address it, and I think that's a fundamental issue. And I think further, there's education required around that tino rangatiratanga isn't fixed to a treaty context, and that the coexistence of tino rangatiratanga and kāwanatanga can be realised and has been realised. And ironically, the National Party have also championed the coexistence of those things with partnerships such as whānau order, and there's many other initiatives as well. But these things require education, and I think in terms of an approach to this, there just needs to be more emphasis on educating people, because fundamentally people have been deprived of that for years, and we're making good progress as a nation, and we need to continue in that direction.
I think we see the Supreme Court as an example of where we're seeing a really beautiful weaving of tikanga and the common law together to provide just and equitable outcomes that reflect our communities and the distinct, I guess, legal philosophies that underpin Te Ao Māori and the Crown, and those values kind of being shown.
Kia ora. We're going to thank you for that. We're going to have to leave it there because we are over time, and I know Scott Willis did want to ask a question, but we haven't got a chance. So I apologise for that. But thank you for your thoughtful and really helpful submission. Kia ora.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thank you.
Yeah. Members, we now have Ngati Iwi Authority, and I think we've got Anaru Virko submitting.
Kia ora e te committee.
Kia ora, Anaru, good to see you. We've got you for 10 minutes to speak to your submission, so in the interest of time, I'll just hand straight over to you.
Ka pai. Tēnā rā tātou e noho rā ki te pai o te committee whiriwhiri manatika. E tū ana au i te aroaro o tōku tūpuna a tōrere nui a rua. Te tiro whakamoana te unga mai o Tainui, ko kuhu ana i te awa Wainui. Tū tangata, ko ngaitai e taunei e. Tēnā te mihi ki aku. Just by way of introduction, the Ngati Iwi Authority is a charitable trust. It was established in 1987 to represent and uphold the mana and integrity of Ngati in matters pertaining to the iwi. We are located east of Ōtautahi in the settlement called Tōrere, named after our tupuna. And again, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Select Committee for providing Ngati Iwi Authority with the opportunity to speak to our submission, which I take as being read. Before touching on some of the key points of our submission, and by way of introduction, we consider that the Select Committee process on its own falls well short of having an appropriate discussion with the other treaty partner on such a significant issue. In short, this bill is in breach of the treaty and possibly creates a new claim against the Crown. And may I add, in the 21st century. It serves only to create a smokescreen, a cover, if you will, for the 28 other pieces of legislation that will have their treaty provisions either reviewed or removed. This bill, and I speak to the bill now, at the front part of it, will not provide certainty and clarity for and about the treaty principles of the treaty. It serves to create greater uncertainty through narrowly constructed Māori rights and interests by virtue, for example, of treaty settlements, thereby attempting to establish through negotiation with the Crown all Māori rights and interests to be recognised through government enacting settlement legislation to do so. It also closes the door on non-settled iwi, historical grievances which they have with the Crown, because this bill proposes to codify principles into law. These principles do not recognise Article 2 rights under the treaty. It applies a narrow interpretation of equal rights before the law, as if to assume that Māori are the same and have no rights under the articles of the treaty. Whereas the rule of law, as it is applied in New Zealand, recognises the importance of the role of the treaty and what it has played in the fabric of our constitutional development. This bill will not promote a national conversation in a way that meets the standards of consultation and analysis for such a significant constitutional issue, and ignores the status of the other signatory to the treaty. No meaningful consultation has been undertaken with us as a signatory to the treaty. It will not promote greater legitimacy. The bill ignores 50 years of treaty jurisprudence and the role the treaty has played in the application of the rule of law in New Zealand. The question is begged, what requires greater legitimacy? The treaty stands. The courts and preceding governments have recognised the treaty in its policies and in its regulatory framework. Why should Ngati need to establish its legitimacy through a poorly conceived and ill-informed bill? Our right to be here was established long before we signed the treaty, yet we signed it in the firm belief that our right to exist as Ngati will continue unencumbered. It will not build consensus. The word consensus in the bill means majority rules through referendum. My rights determined by a majority of voters with no recourse to the courts, the institutions established by the Crown, and no semblance of justice. The Cabinet Manual 2023 states a balance has to be struck between majority power and minority right. The answer cannot always lie in simple majority decision-making. So in summing up, this bill should never come before a select committee in such a circuitous way. We disagree with the import of this bill as it is, and because it ignores the treaty jurisprudence developed by the courts, ignores the reports generated through the Treaty of Waitangi claims and the recommendations of the tribunal, confirms that the Crown will not keep its commitments as a signatory and treaty partner, ignores the recommendations in the regulatory impact statement, and may I add that those officials were under extreme tight timeframes to produce something. Normally you would expect an RIS to be at the front of a bill. This wasn't. So even in the RIS, officials saying stay with the status quo. Claims Māori intellectual property as the property of all New Zealanders, there's no more Article 2, creates further opportunities for, and may I say, the prosaic-minded to attack, belittle Māori rights and interests, for example, at national and local elections, in education, in healthcare, in the environment, in the economy, essentially anywhere, anytime. Codifies principles that bear no resemblance to the articles of the treaty. And the question is begged, then what happens to the treaty if these principles become codified in law? Since the signing of the treaty, we have been confronted with a myriad of statutory instruments devised by the Crown to alienate us from our identity. There's too many of those to articulate at this time, but this bill has the potential to carry on that long-held tradition, only without the shackles of so-called partnership. We are, Ngati Iwi Authority is prepared to treat with the Crown in a manner that we agreed to when we signed that compact 285 years ago. Kia ora mai tātou. I'll take questions now.
Kia ora, Ananu. We do have a little bit of time for questions, and I see Scott Willis has one, so we'll go straight to him.
Thank you, Anaru, and very nice, really nice, concise submission. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And as you've mentioned, the Treaty Principles Bill is an attempt to nullify tino rangatiratanga. And what dangers precisely do you think we're presented with in this proposal for free market exploitation of te taio, nature, and denial of the climate crisis?
This is not unique to New Zealand. It's been attempted in Canada and other places where they attempt to take away the treaty arrangements of the tangata whenua there. And I know the group, and I won't name it here online, but they are prolific in ensuring that Indigenous rights are not recognised in different nations across the world. The danger here, to your question, Scott, the danger here is that we are turning back the clock back to 1840. But the difference is that there is no partner to any other new treaty. This bill doesn't recognise a partnership between Māori and the Crown. That is gone. That's disappeared. That's the danger of, I guess, I mentioned before, it's taken a circuitous route to get here. What should have happened was, before it even crystallised into what it is now, there should have been a discussion with tangata whenua, the other signatories.
Kia ora. Aru, thank you for that. We're pretty much out of time now, so we'll leave it there, but thank you for your very articulate submission and the written submission as well. Really appreciate it. Kia ora.
Kia ora, mate.
Members, we now have Tina Nata, and Tina is online. I see you there. Tina, we've got you for 10 minutes, and that you look somewhat familiar. I think I might have just seen you before, but obviously this is a different capacity.
Yes.
So we'll just hand over to you, and hopefully we'll see some fresh points. Kia ora.
Thank you, Minister Webb, and tēnā koutou, thank you again for the opportunity to speak to my individual submission this time. I guess I wanted to say that I would hope that all of you who are on the Select Committee, when you came into government, you arrived there believing that you could make Aotearoa a better place. And of course, the very nature of government is that it's there to bring together people with different ideas of what better means. But I would hope that there are at least some commonalities across you all. I would hope that you at least believe that you have a healthy respect for democracy and human rights. You would also, I hope, deeply respect the immense privilege that you have to carry power in this land and direct resource on behalf of the nation. Now, quite separate to the disregard that's been shown towards Māori rights by this bill, I'm also submitting that it shows a clear lack of regard towards democracy and good governance by your own Western governance standards. It has been a monumental waste of people's time, energy, and the nation's resource. And I know a number of people have discussed parliamentary sovereignty already with you, and I'm not going to belabor that point, beyond saying that I do agree with Tātai Hākure Durie's point that we are now beyond a time of parliamentary sovereignty and into the age of parliamentary responsibility. But I will say that this bill demonstrates a disdain and a disregard for the judicial pathway that Te Tiriti has been on to this point, and I believe that that disdain and disregard is grossly undemocratic. The separation of power is a fundamental dimension of a functional democracy because it provides for a healthy tension. Democracy, by its very nature, opposes a concentration of power. Democracy is a harmony of tensions and accountability, and this healthy tension is held in place by the judiciary, the executive, the legislature, by opposition MPs, and by varied MPs in government. And all of those tension points within our democracy can be seen as healthy constraints. Te Tiriti o Waitangi is another important healthy constraint upon government, and it is one that is unique to these lands. And because of that, this uniqueness, it should be celebrated and upheld. The bill and the author and proposers to the bill seem to be suggesting that our constitutional settings should only exist if they are demonstrated elsewhere around the world. And quite separate to the fact that there are many places around the world which uphold Indigenous rights, I would strongly reject the notion that we should only constitutionally fashion ourselves after other nations. Democracies represent the uniqueness of their context, and ours is no different. Te Tiriti is a part of our unique Aotearoa democracy. And in fact, I would say that this bill draws from rhetorical arguments rooted in nationalistic stances in so-called United States. And in fact, that flies in the face of celebrating our unique status as Aotearoa New Zealand. Now, the doctrine of discovery, which you'll see is in my written statement, is a shameful and hurtful history of colonial harm and injustice that goes around the world. But importantly, it's not yet done. That book is not yet closed. We are still in that story today, and it's up to us what direction that story will take in our lifetime. It's up to us what role we will play in that story and how our descendants will reflect upon our actions. Now, I do believe that everybody has a leaning towards justice, even if we disagree on what justice looks like. I'm a scholar on the doctrine of discovery because it is a history of injustice which might help us to frame what a journey towards justice might look like. And while Indigenous justice still endures within Aotearoa, I do believe that we have been on a trajectory towards justice. This bill is much more than an ideological tension. It reverses the trajectory towards justice and subverts the democratic processes through which we have charted our way towards a just Aotearoa. We're a treaty nation. By further subverting the treaty foundation upon which Māori have permitted the Crown's presence on these lands, the Treaty Principles Bill amounts to a contemporary attempt at conquest, which is a crime against humanity. It's a shameful mark on this government's record and should have no place on the 21st century. And just in conclusion, I would hope that all of you on the Select Committee have come to this job at a bare minimum with the love for this nation. And if you love this nation, you will love and respect the birth story of this nation. If you love this nation, you will love the covenant upon which it was grown. If you love this nation, you'll love our unique democratic context, which is provided by Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And if you love this nation, you will deeply respect and appreciate the voice of Te Tiriti, which said in 1840 and still says today in 2025 that yes, you may call this place your home, so long as it is not at the expense of those whose home it already is. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Tina. I don't have any questions, but other members may. Scott Willis has a question.
Thank you, Tina. Nice to see you again. And you've talked about the many elements that provide healthy constraints to our democracy. I think I know the answer to this, but do you think that an 8% minor party seeking to impose its will on government to rewrite our foundational document is healthy or unhealthy?
Yeah, look, it's clearly unhealthy from a tikanga Māori perspective. It's clearly unhealthy from a treaty jurisprudence perspective. But, you know, the crux of what I'm here to say today is that it's even unhealthy under a Western governance standard. It's a complete abuse of the vision of MMP, and that is what makes it a really shameful mark upon this government's records. So, yeah, absolutely, it is unhealthy. Thank you.
Kia ora, Tina. Thanks for that. I think we'll leave it there, but thanks for your work on this and for your submissions. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou.
Members, we now have Fraser McKenzie, and we have Fraser for 5 minutes. Waiting for Fraser to come online. Once he's got his camera and mic on, we'll be away.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Fraser. We can't see you yet, but we don't have to see you if that's how you want to do it.
I don't know how to turn the camera on. Might work. Here we go.
There you go. All right. Kia ora, Fraser. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
We've got you for 5 minutes. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to hand straight over to you. And if we have any time, there may be questions at the end.
Cool. I take it. Thank you all for coming along today, and I appreciate all the work that you're all doing, sitting here listening to everyone's submissions. I'll take it you've all read my submission, so I won't go through it line by line or anything. However, I just want to really strongly, the reason I'm a little bit nervous about doing this actually, but I think it's fair for all Kiwis, all New Zealanders, and that's whether you are born here or you even move here, that we all are treated as equal. That's probably my biggest fear, because I've got 2 little girls, that they might not be treated equal. Healthcare is a big one for me. As I've got older parents, I want to make sure that they've been treated equal. They've also paid their taxes. They've done all their hard work. They've supported a lot of communities, and I still believe that they should be treated equal as well. And education is another big one, that we all should be treated as equal for education. So I believe that we should all be allowed to vote for the bill to go through as an individual for each New Zealander. That's the rights of being here. I think not just a certain amount of people can approve whether this goes to the polls or if it's not to go to the polls. I believe that all New Zealanders should have the right to vote for this, because whatever happens going forward will determine the future. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we're just trying to be united as one, not divided at the moment. And I feel that there's more division now than ever before. And I can tell right away as I talk to my little girls about it, and they tell me there is a division and it's not getting better. We've all travelled here from, no one's existed ever, was born here, as in 10,000 years ago. As we've all travelled here from somewhere around the world. Happy to take any questions.
Sure, thanks for that, Fraser. Dr. Ferris has a question.
Hey,
kia ora ho. Thank you for your time and submitting. I just want to pick up on your desire that everyone receive equal treatment. Do you think that Māori receive equal treatment through the healthcare system? Do you think Māori receive equal treatment through the education system?
Yes, I do.
Well, then, all of the statistics, particularly around health and education, tell us the exact opposite story. So how do we get to a clear platform for the discussion without one side or the other having a view that's not founded in the facts? How do we do that?
I couldn't tell you how to do that because I'm not qualified in the health system or the educational system. But from my experience, that trying to make it equal for everybody would be a better outcome for all than trying to make it that certain people get VIP treatment just because of their...
Well, it's definitely not Māori. Māori are definitely not getting VIP education or health.
Thanks,
Kia ora,
Taka.
kia ora e hoa.
Kia ora, thanks, Taka. I think we'll leave it there. Clear difference of opinion. So, but that's all good. Fraser, pretty much out of time, so we'll leave your submission there. But thanks for taking the time to let Parliament know your views on this bill. Kia ora.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye. All right. Thank you. And members, I understand that our next submitter isn't available, but James McGilvray is.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Kia ora, James. We've got you for 10 minutes. So in the interest of time, I'll just hand straight over to you, and we may have questions at the end.
Thank you for that. I guess I should start by saying I do support the Treaty Principles Bill, and the reason for that is quite simple. I've been reading a lot in recent times from a number of organisations, particularly the New Zealand Law Society, our former Attorney General Chris Finlayson, about what those treaty principles are. And I have to say, I do agree the treaty principles are well documented. The Waitangi Tribunal courts have established those going back to the 1970s. The problem we have with our society is that is a very narrow group of people. It's a very distinct group, and outside of those particular groups, the treaty principles aren't all that well understood. During the election campaign, for example, I went and sat in a number of different political parties' meetings. And at one meeting, a gentleman sort of raised the issue that co-governance was the greatest concern facing our country. And when I asked this particular individual what co-governance meant, he wasn't actually able to define it. But yet he said it's the biggest threat to our democracy and he's scared of it. And I think that's where we've got to as a country, is because these principles are not well understood by the community at large. You've got a large proportion of our population who are fearful of them. In the course of 2 generations, we've gone from the treaty being declared, and treaty being declared a nullity, to being declared the single most important document in New Zealand's history. And that's a significant change. But unfortunately, the reason why that's happened is not well understood outside of legal and academic circles. Currently, we have a number of businesses and councils representing us in terms of our local government. And because they don't understand treaty principles, these organisations are spending large amounts of money on specific treaty translators and interpreters. And it's money that I would submit could be better spent elsewhere. By taking the opportunity as a nation to set out and codify our treaty principles, it's an opportunity to come together and address the fears of both sides of this debate, bring them together, unify them, and come up with a clear path forward. It's also an opportunity to remove the needless spending on interpreting treaty principles by organisations that don't necessarily understand them, and divert that money into something that would benefit all New Zealanders. And that's the crux of my submission. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you for that, Jamie. Members, we've got plenty of time for questions if members have any. Yes, Taka Ferris has a question.
Kia ora, huh?
Kia ora.
Thanks for your time and your thoughts. The principles of the treaty are sort of an evolving thing, and they come. The application of principles in treaty law is part of the treaty package of law internationally. So if you can't work it out between you can go to principles. we can also not bother with principles and just stick with the text of the treaty. That's sort of, if we want to get everything on the table, well, this is the natural choice in response to your view that it's a bit of a waste of time or the principles work. So what are your viewpoints about that? Perhaps we let the principles go and just return to dealing with the text of the treaty. What do you think of that?
I actually agree with you to a certain extent. The principles of the treaty are important, and what you said is that they exist. They exist. They're there. I'm not disputing that. We've established them since going back to the 1970s. And what I would counter is that the law is capable of evolving. Yes, okay, we set these principles down in writing today. We codify them. We make it clear for everyone. But as we've seen over time, the courts have gone back and they're able to open things and interpret these things, and they can be updated as society changes. What I'm saying is, by today, sitting down together as a community and saying, okay, this is what we believe these principles are as a nation, and codifying them offers a lot more certainty than just having one group of academics and scholars who just study these things on a regular basis and understanding them. But meanwhile, you've got mum and dad business owner out there who doesn't understand it, but they want to grow their business, and suddenly they need to consult treaty experts to see what their resource consent requirements might be. And so that's sort of my issue, is by not having them set out somewhere where it's clear for people to go and get that information they need. It's costing us. It's costing us time, and it's costing us money that could be better spent elsewhere.
But like this bill.
Yeah, I agree. It's an ironic point of view, considering I acknowledge that National and NZ First have said this bill's a dead duck in the water. The fact we're having these conversations, is costing time and money that probably would be better spent elsewhere.
Okay, Jamie, I'm going to go to Andy Foster now, who's got another question.
Yeah, look, thanks very much. Look, I'm finding myself a little bit confused here that you, on one hand, want the community to codify, but then on the other hand, you see it as evolving, the principles as being evolving over time, and they're evolving through the work of courts and other academics and people, which you didn't seem very keen on. So which is the pathway that you see us best going? Because I'm a little confused as to which pathway you're encouraging us to go down.
They both work together. As we're seeing with all laws, regardless of things, over time laws evolve and they change. And I'm saying that will happen with this treaty principles bill. Even by adopting that bill, it doesn't have to mean that the principles are black and white, set in stone at that day, as our laws and our views and our society will change with time. What I'm saying is, at the moment, there is clear misunderstanding of what the treaty principles are within the community. And because of that misunderstanding, there is fear on both sides of the political divide, whether you support this bill or you don't. Both sides are fearful of what these treaty principles mean in our society. So by having a debate and codifying the principles, it's a chance for each side to express what their fears are, and a chance for us all to get on the same page, set these things down once and for all so we understand, but knowing the nature and the way societies move and laws move, that they will change over time moving forward, as all laws do.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time making that submission. We'll leave it there. But once again, thanks for both your written and your oral submissions. Kia ora.
Thank you.
Members, the next submitter is All Hapu of Te Mahu Rehure. And we'll just wait for them to come online. Kia ora. Kia ora. Good to see you. We've set aside 10 minutes to hear from you, to speak to your submission. I'll just hand straight over to you, and there may be questions later.
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou te komiti whakawā. Kia koe te hea mana tēnā koutou katoa. Ko tōku ingoa ko ipu Tito Absalom o te iwi o te Mahure Hure ki Hokianga. Ko whakararangi hia o etahi o oku hapu ki roto I oku tuhinga ki te komiti whakahaere. Tēnā koutou. To begin with, I'd like to let you know that the 3 signatories of Te Māhure, Moka, Pi, and Tāwhai, who signed the Treaty of Waitangi at Māngungu in Hokianga on the 12th of February 1840, did so after lengthy negotiations in the Hui. The subject, do we want them here or do we send them away? The rest is history. When treaties were signed between tribal nations and the British Crown earlier in either in Aotearoa or with the First Nations in Canada, British Columbia, and elsewhere in the world, both parties approached the process with diverse expectations of each other. For tribal nations, they viewed the treaty as a covenant. Their word was their bond, and it became a tapu pledge for them. The view of our tribal nations, collectively known as tangata whenua, give emphasis to the spiritual nature of the treaty through tātai and hui. Given that beginning, we know the spirit refers to relational, to mutual benefit, to balance, harmony, and to the enduring nature of treaties that guided the creation of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the treaty, to beyond its written terms. So, understanding the spirit and intent of the treaty requires acknowledging those aspects and recognizing that the written text does not capture the full meaning of the treaty. It involves the full inclusion of the historical, cultural, and spiritual contexts in which the treaty was made. It needs the oral history to gain an understanding handed down the generations that plays a significant role in interpreting the treaty. The Crown failed miserably in that regard, as they did not see the need, given that their intent wasn't respectable from the beginning. So now the current Crown is scrambling. Our courts cannot interpret the treaty competently without the spirit, and neither can the Act Party, emboldened by their co-collaborators, who are fast becoming the biggest threat to the security of Aotearoa. The Act Party leader is a trickster, like an ancestor of his, full of guile and deceit, who cleverly schemed and used trickery to see what he could get away with for his own ends. The Act Party leader is pulling an elaborate hoax on us all. It's a calculating, fraudulent, and delusional scheme, a tactic straight out of the far-right extremist playbook, while they continue to sow the seed of hatred for their own ends. We know the game. It has been played out multiple times since the signing. National and New Zealand First parties are buddies by association. The Act Party's bill also brings the Crown representatives, that is, Crown signatories, into disrepute. But I doubt they're troubled by that. But as far as I'm concerned, those signatories ought to be protected to make everyone else in Aotearoa relevant. The spirit and intent of the treaty is a core value that determines how we behave towards each other. To share the land and resources in a way that respected natural laws and guaranteed ongoing cooperation with tribal laws and customs. The Act Party's bill is a classic example of Crown intent. As we know, their track record has not been trustworthy since the signing. They have breached both the treaty and Te Tiriti numerous times. This time, the Act Party's bill is not only a bald-faced breach, it is a downright exploitation of political muscle. So now we are faced with an illiberal democratic government who, to quote a very good friend of mine, have increasingly employed divisive tactics that play on racial tensions, particularly by demonizing Māori. A calculated move designed to erode public support for Māori-led initiatives that emphasize sustainable development and environmental conservation, end quote. When our tupuna signed the Treaty of Waitangi, they had their eyes on the future of their tribes. They looked to, one, secure a relationship that would ensure the survival and prosperity of their tribes. Two, establish peaceful and equitable relationships or relations with the British Crown. Three, protect their unparalleled culture and spiritual traditions. And four, facilitate the transition to a new economic lifestyle that was taking hold by 1840. We know this, it was happening in Hokianga. They didn't ask for much in the relationship, but with that in mind, the burden of the treaty has been borne unduly by us, tangata whenua, through armed and passive resistance, clashes, demonstrations, protests, petitions, civil disobedience, litigations, you name it. Whatever was sort of lawful-ish, we did it. We also resorted to occupations, hikoi onto parliament and tribunal claims, while the rest of this country's occupants have amassed fortunes and benefits without shouldering any weight of the treaty. We know also that this cannot continue as is, for successive generations will bring a very different approach to the papa. I will end my submission on what my good friend had written, and in the final analysis, his words resonate the reality of our forebears and succeeding generations who have been condemning the Crown for almost 186 years. Quote, Māori have fought tirelessly to protect our language, land, environment, and culture. Māori communities have led the struggle for justice, taking on the fight for the recognition of our rights. We have defended our shared heritage and reminded us of the values we hold dear. The treaty should not be a burden borne by Māori alone. It is time for every New Zealander to stand in solidarity with the treaty and with each other. This means acknowledging the history and legacy that we inherit, end quote. Lastly, to ensure the continuity of tribal prospects and for the sake of unity with the rest of New Zealand, we insist that ex-treaty principles bill is ripped up and safeguards are put into place to prevent any rogue tricksters from raising their scheming tricksters' head. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. He pātai.
Tēnā koe. Well, Pātai, members, anyone have a question? We've just got a little over a minute left. Tātou.
Tēnā koe, kui koutou ngā uri o te māhure.
Tēnā koe.
Ka nui te mihi. I like your statement, or the statement maybe of the author, that it's time for everyone to stand up and do their part for Te Tiriti o Waitangi. In that vein, I mean, Te Tiriti o Waitangi gives all non-Māori the constitutional right to be here.
That's right.
I always go on about that being the gift of Māori to non-Māori, is you actually have every right to be here.
That's right.
Kia ora. Well, I think we'll just leave it there then. Fire. That's right.
Kia ora.
Tēnā koe kui ngā mihi nui.
Kia ora, ngā mihi. Thank you very much.
Tēnā koutou.
Members, our next submitters are the Aotearoa Tonga Response Group. And I think we've got Pakalao coming online.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Marlo, good to see you. Just
trying to turn the camera on. Just give me a sec. Here we go.
Kia ora. Marlo, good to see you. Good to see you too, Angela. We've got you for 10 minutes to speak to your submissions. There may be some questions at the end, so I'll just hand straight over to you.
Kia ora. Kore ke o hufanga I ngāhi tala malu e whanua. Mihi atu ki a koutou e te rangatira mā o te wharepare mata Aotearoa New Tireni. Thank you for allowing voices from Mananui Kiwa, our blue continent of the Great Pacific Ocean, to be heard on this very important issue. I will recite the ancient Māori whakatauki that connects us as one people that predates the treaty by over 1,000 years. E kore au e ngaro, he kākano I ruia mai I Rangiatea. I shall never be lost, for I am a seed sown in Rangiatea. Tūturu whakamaua kia tina.
Tina.
Haumi e, hui e, tāniki
e. Exea Dr. Duncan Webb. The presenters today are Pakilau Aotearoa Manasilua and I, Anahila Kanongata. Aotearoa Tongan Response Group led 3 major projects in the last 5 years. 1, presented a petition to Parliament for pathways for residency for overstayers on 21 July 2020. 2, use of Lea Whakatonga, Tongan language, to deliver safety messages, vaccination during the COVID-19 pandemic from 2020 to 2021. Lastly, we led the New Zealand-wide Tongan response to the volcanic eruption Hunga Tonga, Hunga Ha'apai, involving over 150,000 people from 15th of January 2022. We as Tongans are tangata teriti under the treaty, and we have made Aotearoa our home. We boldly and unequivocally make this statement for the record. Aotearoa Tongan Response Group strongly opposed the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill and rebuke those who would denigrate the rights of Māori as tangata whenua and the main party to the treaty with the Crown. We call on the Crown to do the right thing and apologise, rescind the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill, and most of all to honour te tiriti.
As some of you may know, Tonga alone in the Pacific region has never been conquered or formally colonised or lost its sovereignty. Through strong, unified and astute leadership, Tonga was able to keep its sovereignty intact. This was only ever directly threatened once in 1900, when the administration at the time was forced to sign a treaty of friendship and protection with Great Britain. Despite that, Tonga was still able to self-govern and run its own affairs. Ironically, the Treaty of Protection with Great Britain possibly helped save Tonga from being forcibly taken over by the other major colonial powers of the US and Europe operating at the time, as they are now in Moana. This is including New Zealand, who has forcibly taken over Samoa, Cook Islands and Niue during this period. Even as relatively recent as 1926, when it took over Tokelau, which is still sovereign New Zealand territory to this day. So the New Zealand government, or the Crown, has shown time and again that it has a pattern of trampling on the mana and sovereignty of Indigenous peoples, not just here in Aotearoa, but also in the Pacific region. Right now, we have over 10% of New Zealand's naval capacity sunk accidentally, leaking oil and polluting pristine marine life a few miles offshore of Samoa, with little remorse or recompense, despite this not being the very first time New Zealand has done this. And I refer to the tragedy of another ship, the SS Talune, in 1918, resulting in thousands of preventable deaths. Who knows what long-term impacts will come from this latest disaster? Dare I say it, there are tensions right now as we speak in the Cook Islands over China. Ostensibly, the Cook Islands realizing that it wants its sovereignty cake and to eat it too. Mindful that Indigenous people in West Papua and New Caledonia are literally fighting and dying to gain their sovereignty. But remember, China is the new kid on the block, who arguably looks and acts nothing like the usual perpetrators, and to my knowledge has never had a history of colonization or taking the sovereignty of independent nations in this region. Yes, we know what sovereignty tastes like. We know what it smells like and feels like, especially when it's trampled on. Ask the American Samoans, who provide more soldiers per capita than any state of America, to join the US Army, but are not allowed to vote for the country they are prepared to die for. Ask the mighty 28th Māori Battalion, who Field Marshal Erwin Rommel famously said, "Give me a Māori battalion and I will rule the world." They bled and died for a country that denied them the very rights promised under the treaty. The Treaty of Waitangi Bill is essentially threatening to do the same thing again. It is re-traumatizing Māori and opening old wounds. It could be said, as it was said at Waitangi recently by the Haukainga, to certain politicians in attendance there that the Treaty of Waitangi Principles Bill and its champions and enablers represent the spirit of the colonizer. So if it twerks like a kupapa, quacks like a kupapa, it must be a kupapa. Therefore, again, I reiterate, as my chair has already said, our extreme distaste and opposition to this most harmful bill.
Pakilau and I stand here also as proud children of the infamous Dawn Raids. Our parents took a calculated risk, and yes, they too broke the law to find a new life for themselves here in Aotearoa. But so did the Crown. One could argue that the Crown breached its own treaty to help one party fleeing adversity or seeking a better life with clear advantages over the other party, who were the Indigenous people already living a good life here. How many times has the Crown breached the treaty? Too many times. What this bill is attempting to do is retrospectively annul those breaches by extinguishing Māori sovereignty or tino rangatiritanga over their own affairs, as promised to them in their tiriti, the Te Reo Māori text. As a former Labour Member of Parliament, and I am proud of the fact that an apology was made for the way our people, ngā iwi o Mananui a Kiwa, were treated during the Dawn Raids. Pakilau and I were not just passive observers or families of the affected. We were directly affected. Yes, it was painful, and most of our loved ones never got to see or hear the apology. But imagine the pain Māori must feel to be essentially dispossessed, disempowered, and effectively disowned of their sovereignty on their own lands. Treaty settlements, as we know, come with an automatic Crown apology to the particular iwi. But to our knowledge, we have yet to hear the Crown make a formal apology for breaching the Treaty of Waitangi on the principle of the matter, and not just in relation to treaty settlement. So the Aotearoa Tongan Response Group recommend to this committee: 1, advise Parliament and this government to reject the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. 2, advise Parliament and this government that the Crown should formally apologise to all Māori for all historic breaches of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi.
Kia ora, thank you both for that powerful submission. Look, members, we've got a little bit of time for questions if anyone has a question. If not, Scott, you've got him just in time there. I'll go to Scott. I was going to ask one myself, but I think you'll go, Scott.
Thank you. And on your second recommendation, a formal apology from the Crown, how important do you think this is to repair some of the damage, some of the harm the Treaty Principles Bill has done to our nation?
Thank you, Scott. That's a really good question. I think when one apologizes, it's because they recognize there has been a wrong done. So from that apology is actually saying there was wrong that's done. We need to address it. And the first way to do that is to acknowledge and apologize.
Kia ora. I wonder if I could ask a question. Sorry, did you hear one, Takata? No, okay. Coming from Tonga, which you proudly noted has never been colonised, and it would appear, therefore, that there's greater Indigenous self-determination or tēnā rangatiratanga. Can you just talk a little bit about that and how that compares to New Zealand, and how, if there are any lessons we can learn?
I'm sure, Duncan, I'll cover that one. Tonga's situation is quite unique. It's a much smaller place, much smaller country than Aotearoa. So it was not easier, but it was through strategic strategy of our king, Te Paul I, to unite the country. So rather than having to deal with a number of 100 different chiefs and their hapu, you only had one, basically the monarch to deal with. So when the Western powers came, the king already had established the legislature, had already established the constitution. So the European power saw something that it could recognise already, and Tonga was fairly running its own affairs. So that partly allowed Tonga to, maintain its sovereignty. Now, be a lot harder to do that in Aotearoa, taking it's a much bigger country, much bigger population. And yeah, Tonga was just, fortunate to have had a very strong leader and some luck.
All right. Look, thank you both for your submission and the interesting note at the end. We are out of time, but thanks again for both your written submission and your oral submission, and of course for all the work that you do. So kia ora. Malo.
Malo. Kia ora.
Malo. Opat.
Members, our next submission, and I think it may be our last submission for today, is the Aotearoa New Zealand Association of Social Workers. And I see we have Nathan on to present. Kia ora, Nathan. Good to see you, and Bronwyn Larson as well. Look, we've got you for 10 minutes, and if we've got time, we may have some questions at the end, but in the interests of using that effectively, I'll hand it straight over to you. Kia ora.
Kia ora, a tēnā koutou katoa. Ko nā toki matawharo te waka, ko pangaru papati te maunga, ko whakarapa te awa, ko hokianga te moana, ko Ngati Manoa te hapu, ko Ngati Manoa te marae, ko te raroa te iwi, ko Nathan Chongni tā kuingoa.
Tēnā rangatira, tēnā koutou. No ke te rana, no airana o ku tūpuna, e te puaki au ki te whenua o Kaitahu, he Pākehā ahau, he tangata tiriti ahau, ko Bronwyn Larson ahau.
As tangata whenua of Te Raroa, as a registered social worker and chief executive of ANZ ASW, I stand here today alongside my colleague Bronwyn Larson to strongly oppose the Treaty Principles Bill on behalf of Te Ropu Tauwhiro Aotearoa, the Aotearoa New Zealand Association of Social Workers. This bill is a direct assault on Māori mana, tino rangatiratanga, and our collective future as a nation. We oppose it unequivocally. I takahia te mana o tangata o te whenua. We also speak today knowing it will be tamariki, rangatahi, and whānau who will bear the consequences if this bill were to be enacted. I think of the aspirations of my tupuna, those that they had for me, for us as a people to thrive, to stand in our mana, to shape a future that upholds our tino rangatiratanga. I think of the aspirations of our rangatira, past and present, across the social work sector and among our allies, the aspirations for a just and equitable Aotearoa. I fear its impact, not only if it passes into law, but in its very existence. In the signal it sends to our tamariki and our rangatahi. Their mana, their tino rangatiratanga, is not something to be debated, negotiated, or dismissed. This bill is nothing short of a regression. It drags us back into the decades past where greater power was wielded over Māori rather than decision-making with Māori. Why does this bill matter so much to us? As registered social workers, we witness the devastating impacts of colonisation daily. Social work agencies report up to 68% of our client base is Māori. This reflects 69% of all children in care, 37% of referrals to women's refuge, overrepresentation in mental health services, criminal justice services, poverty, material hardship, and the list goes on. For us, Te Tiriti o Waitangi is not an abstract concept. Colonisation created these disparities, and we are fighting every day to dismantle them. Conversely, 24% of our social work workforce is proudly tangata whenua, me included. We understand the importance of kaupapa Māori approaches in addressing the harm caused by colonisation. Secondly, as registered social workers, we have a legal and ethical obligation to Te Tiriti o Waitangi under the Social Workers Registration Act 2003. Competency Standard 1 requires us to demonstrate knowledge of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, Te Reo Māori, and Tikanga Māori, and uphold mana-enhancing, self-determining, and culturally respectful practice. This is reaffirmed in Principle 2 of the SWRB Code of Conduct, which also requires partnership working with Māori. Our association's Code of Ethics, Ngā Tikanga Matatika, reinforces Te Tiriti o Waitangi as the foundation of social work practice in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It compels us to promote an Indigenous identity for social work, educate ourselves about Te Tiriti, and challenge monocultural power structures. Justice, equity, and partnership are inseparable from social work. This bill flies in the face of this professional mandate. by sidelining the very rights Te Tiriti o Waitangi guarantees to Māori, namely decision-making without including Māori. This would be unacceptable in social work practice and should be unacceptable in legislation. What's more, because of this bill and similar directives, social workers are being asked to practice in a way that contravenes these professional obligations. Social workers are distressed by these developments. They are distressed because this practice is not consistent with social justice, human rights, and equity, values that are so deeply etched into the fabric of social work that it's often the main reason we enter this profession. We can't tolerate legislation that represents monocultural control over power and decision-making and seeks to diminish Māori rights, abandoning our professional ethics and responsibilities. We won't risk repeating past atrocities like those that the Royal Commission of Inquiry on Abuse and Care so starkly exposed.
Additionally, the bill's emphasis on equality and unity misrepresents what's needed to actually achieve justice and fairness. Social workers understand that equity, not equality, is the pathway to meaningful change. Equity acknowledges the impacts of colonisation and systemic disadvantage, ensuring tailored approaches, including Indigenous approaches, to achieve fair outcomes. So the idea that treating everyone the same will create fairness is a myth. It ignores the reality of how power is distributed across Aotearoa New Zealand. We are not an egalitarian nation. We never have been. This fact is something that we see played out in the lives of our clients every day. Treating everyone the same will deepen inequalities and not resolve them. This bill claims to promote unity, but true kotahitanga, standing together in solidarity, can only happen when Māori rights and tino rangatiratanga are honoured. This bill has sown division by ignoring Māori voices and dismissing rights embedded within Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Despite this, I'm deeply hopeful because what we've seen is a groundswell of support for Te Tiriti o Waitangi from both tangata whenua and tangata tiriti. And that's the kind of unity that we need, one based on shared belonging, equity, and mutual respect for all diverse identities. We also see grave risks in centralising power through this bill. The bill places the power to define treaty principles in the hands of Parliament, and we must remember that Parliament is a Eurocentric body that has historically failed to uphold Māori rights. The bill essentially removes the checks and balances currently provided by the judiciary, and that's crucial in holding the Crown accountable and maintaining a fair and just democracy. So this shift doesn't just threaten Māori. We fear that it weakens the democratic foundations of Aotearoa. A strong democracy requires trust and transparent shared decision-making, not the consolidation of power. Contrary to some of what we've already heard at this committee, we can look to other examples around the world of successful shared decision-making and self-determination of Indigenous peoples. We need to be brave enough to reimagine this not so far off ideal and make a conscious decision to depart from the colonial ideology which this bill so plainly represents.
At a time when Aotearoa faces pressing challenges, climate change, housing, health inequities, this bill is a distraction. Instead of fostering division, Parliament should focus on real solutions in partnership with Māori. The premise of this bill distorts the notion that Māori rights will only be advanced if assimilated into the rights of all. Social workers are acutely aware from lessons of our past that the real-life application of assimilation is pain, poverty, illness, homelessness, isolation, grief, hopelessness, and so on. The bill will only worsen inequities, not only for Māori, but for all New Zealanders who depend on fair, just systems. No matter what this government or any future government does, our commitment to Te Tiriti o Waitangi and its central place in our profession will not waver. The aspirations we hold for Māori, for our members, for social work, and for the future of Aotearoa stand in direct opposition to this bill. We will not stand for it. There is no negotiation, no reinterpretation, and no compromise that would ever allow us to diminish the standing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. We urge the committee to recommend the immediate withdrawal of the Treaty Principles Bill. It undermines Te Tiriti o Waitangi, disrespects Māori as tangata whenua, and jeopardizes our shared future as a nation. This is not just about protecting Māori rights, it's about the kind of society we want to leave for our tamariki and our mokopuna. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. And if we have time, Bron and I welcome your pātai.
Kia ora. We do have just a small amount of time. So if any member has a question, now's the chance. No, look, we don't. Oh, Takata's got a question. Good on you, Takata.
Hey, kia ora, guys. Thanks. It's a great submission. Your fellas' work is massively important for the future of the country. The future of the country needs thriving families. Young Māori make up about 30% of the future workforce. All of these indicators point in a particular direction. Do you think that the rights that are inherent in the treaty and given to non-Māori are under threat by the treaty principles bill?
Kia ora matua. It's interesting, the conversation about rights. And sorry, I didn't catch all of what you said just then. But no, I don't think so. Aroha mai. Brian, did you have anything to add?
Sorry, Matua, so the question was that whether the bill places the rights of Māori under threat. Sorry for clarification. Was that your question?
No, does the bill place the constitutional rights that are given to all non-Māori under threat?
The constitutional rights. I'm not an expert in constitutional law, so I can't provide that, but I would say on my limited understanding, no, we are still all equal under the law here in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Kia ora. Thank you for that. So thanks, Taka, for asking the most difficult question in the last dying moments of the committee for the day. And look, thank you for your submission. You are our last submitters for the day, but it was a really great submission. And thank you also for your written submission, which is a good contribution as well. So thank you very much, Ngāmihi, and thanks for your submission. Members, that brings our meeting for the day to a close. So I'll see you all again on Thursday. Kia ora.
Yeah.